so we're officially in the meeting.
Yeah.
Morning, everybody. Welcome to the budget hearing for Saturday.
Crazy.
What day is this?
November 4th.
That's my alarm, sorry. I have to be awake now. Let me turn this off. You guys have my yours too. Welcome to the budget hearing for Saturday, November 11th. It is 8:30. Time to call this meeting to order. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk Simpson informed the board that she would not be able to attend today, so for the time being, I am going to call roll, and then I will ask for a motion to appoint an acting recording secretary. Yes. Roll call. Trustee Vogel. Here. Trustee Papantos.
Present.
Trustee Vito.
Here.
Trustee Brady.
Here.
Trustee Kruger.
Present.
Trustee Lang.
Here.
President Horker.
Here.
May I ask for a motion to appoint Mike Crotty acting recording secretary?
So moved.
I'll second.
Trustee Papantos, Trustee Lang. Motion made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Yes.
Any opposed? Mike, the floor is yours.
Okay. Look like Archie.
Are there any citizens' comments and concerns?
There are none.
Thank you. Purpose of today's meeting with the budget. Thank you all for being here on Saturday, by the way. Mr. Spondelos, will you please guide us through this? Thank you. As President Horker said, thank you all for being here. I think the state of the weather is indicative of the state of our state at the moment, but more on that later. Again, thank you all for coming on a Saturday morning. Thank you to the board, as always, for being here and being willing and actively participating in this process. This is the most important thing that we do all year, as it is the driver for what we will do next year. As in years past, but becoming more and more a necessity, the budget process is a year-long process. Preparing for today really starts on January 1st. And it is the driver for everything that we do, and we're going to get into a lot of detail about what are the challenges that are happening, but we're also going to celebrate some of the successes that we are realizing in the face of some fairly significant challenges from the state, even some that came as recent as yesterday and, in all honesty, may very well change this entire conversation. I'm sure most of you have heard that at least out of the House, it has passed out of committee a tax freeze that would affect us, and certainly that's going to have a major impact on all decisions that we make. But the budget that's being presented to you today is the one that was presented to you in draft form several weeks ago, the one that we reviewed individually, and that is how we're proceeding at this point, and we will go on from there should the need arise, depending on what the state does. The agenda for today will look very similar to what we have done in the past. There will be a presentation from Finance Director Monchain. As usual, we have tried to make this process not only specific about what funds are being approved for next year, how money is being spent, but perhaps more importantly, it is an opportunity to educate the public about their local government finances. This process is very important, as people should have a good understanding of where our money comes from and how it is spent. And so we try to make this event very educational for everyone involved. So again, there will be a focus on that. We are very happy to say that we are presenting options today. At the end of the day, that hopefully will result in a balanced budget. There are many difficult decisions to get to that point. There have been many difficult decisions to get us to this point. And as I said earlier, this is a year-long process that makes some of this process more streamlined, but again comes with the need to make some difficult choices. In the past, we've survived the crisis from 2009, and we kept talking about the short term, looking for 4 or 5 years. Everything should be fine. The economy will change. We just need to get through the next 4 or 5 years. Well, here we are almost 10 years later, and we're still struggling with the same challenges, which is why the approach that we took this year from the ground up through every department, through these conversations, is what is the long-term goal? What are the long-term fixes? What are the structural, foundational fixes to make sure that the village thrives in these trying times and certainly fluid times when it comes to the state and what their impact on us is going to be? We continue to make those changes again at the department level. However, some of the biggest opportunities for us, as you know, being a service industry, is at the personnel level. No one should get too nervous out there. Everyone knows that personnel are 80% of our budget, and we have taken a hard look at what we need to continue operating and providing the services that this board expects and that the residents and businesses of our community expect. And we continue to do that. That is an ongoing process, and it is a challenge. We have eliminated a significant number of positions over the last several years, and we are operating very near skeleton crew status. I don't want to over-dramatize the situation. Our fund balance is healthy, but in order to look 5 years and beyond, we need to make sure that we're making the right structural decisions. So any personnel issues that we are dealing with, we are certainly going to try and address through attrition. But again, this is an ongoing process with the focus of making sure that we are always able to provide the services at the level that the board and the residents expect. So today, Director Monchain is going to walk us through the meat of our fiscal year 2018 budget and talk to us about where we're at in the smaller micro and the macro picture. Then we're going to take a short break and have the department heads come up and talk to you about some of the positives, some of the things that they have done, the policies that they have instituted at their level to control spending, some of the successes they've had, what they're looking forward to next year, and of course then hand it over to the liaison to make a couple of statements about the budget that they reviewed with the department that they represent. We will have a brief executive session, and then we will come back out and summarize the day and make those specific decisions regarding what will become the final fiscal year 2018 budget. With that, Director Monchain, if you would.
All right, good morning.
Good morning.
I'd like to just echo what the village manager had to say in terms of thanking you all for being here on a Saturday morning. I know everybody probably has things they'd rather be doing than this, but this is a very important process, and it sets the direction for the village for the coming year and beyond. And I'd also like to thank all the departments here who are represented, because they put in a lot of work to prepare their budgets, and we appreciate that. And in particular, I'd like to single out members of the finance department staff who are here today and who do the majority of the work to get us to this point, and that's Brian Smith, who's the Assistant Finance Director, Mike Morrow, who's sitting next to him, who's our accountant, and Angela Peters, our Financial Services Coordinator. So they do a lot of the work to put the budget together, and then I get to talk about it, but the hard work is done by them. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and if at any point you have questions, please interrupt me, and we'll try to address them at the time. Oh, here we go. Okay. So today's topics, I'm going to talk about the economy briefly, a little education about what the budget is, the projected results for 2017, revenue and expenditure trends, Then I'm going to talk about a little bit of benchmarking. How do we compare to our neighbors in terms of our communities around Wheeling? Pension funding, which is a critical issue for every community. Then we're going to talk briefly about the 2018 proposed budget, the proposed property tax levy, and then celebrating our success, the things that we have done well. And then finally, I'm going to end with a discussion of property tax burden, which is also an educational piece for the public. So launching right into that. The good news, and I think everybody is aware, is the economy is doing very well compared to prior years. I always like to put this up here. It's a chart showing the gross domestic product. You'll see that for the third quarter of 2017, there was 3% growth, but for the last several years, there's been growth in the 1 to 3% range, and that's certainly better than where we were at the time of the Great Recession. So you can see we had negative growth back then. Another indicator of the strength of the economy is the Case-Shiller Chicago Home Price Index, and you'll see by this chart that for several years there was negative home values, and that has turned around since 2013, and home values are now going up again. This is a new slide that I put in this year. It's the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index. It's an indication of what consumers think about the economy and how good they feel about it, what their confidence is. And as you can see, that's been going up for a number of years too. Last year in 2016, there was a blip there, but for the most part, people are feeling very good about the economy. And that's reflected also in the stock market. If we look at the S&P 500, it's up nearly 16% this year after several years of growth. In fact, if you had invested in the S&P 500 after 2008, when it was down 38%, you would have seen your investment grow by 115% since that time. So again, all indications are that the economy is strong, is getting stronger, and of course the Dow exceeded 23,000 for the first time back in October, and that was obviously a new record. This slide it combines the S&P 500 results over the years with the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, and the reason I threw this in there is you can see that generally speaking, they track each other. So when the economy, when people feel that the economy is doing well, they invest in the stock market. And it's pretty consistent across the board. When people are feeling good, the S&P 500 is up. So I just thought that was another interesting indicator. And then in terms of unemployment, U.S. unemployment, the rate has fallen to the lowest level in nearly 17 years. If we compare where we're at in 2017 to back where we were in 2010, which was the worst point in recent history for unemployment, and then again 10 years earlier to 2007, you can see how much better things have gotten. So at this point, we have 3.3% unemployment in Wheeling, which translates to 731 residents who are unemployed. That's better than it was in October of 2007, which was our prior high water mark for unemployment. So again, same thing, things are going well. We also see it in terms of the number of people who are applying for jobs with the village. A lot of the vacancies that we've had to fill in recent months have been difficult to fill because we just haven't had that many applicants, and that's an indication of where unemployment is. So now I want to talk briefly about the budget, and I know that you've heard this before, but I think it's important for the residents to understand how our budget works. And I put this picture in here, and I'll ask the question, does anybody know what this is a picture of?
Mayberry.
That's right. Very good. I didn't think anybody would get that, but that is Mayberry, in case you were wondering. And the reason I put that in there is because I think that a lot of residents don't really understand how important local government is, and in particular municipal government, and they have kind of an idea that local government is like Mayberry. And in fact, I wanted to tell a story. A few years ago, occasionally from time to time, people that I meet will ask me what I do for a living. And I will say, well, I'm the finance director for the Village of Wheeling. And a few years ago, I got asked that question, and I said that. And the person, who was a very bright person, very accomplished person, looked at me and said, "Is that a full-time job?" And I said, well, yeah, actually, we are an $80 million municipal corporation with 235 employees and 37,000 residents. And believe it or not, it is a full-time job. So, but I bring that up because I think that people don't really understand that. And so it's important to talk about the budget. The budget this year, the total budget, exceeds $80 million. And it consists of a number of different funds. And in the government sector, we use fund accounting to account for different revenue sources. So as you'll see, and I won't go through each of these, but we have separate funds for water and sewer revenue, for police and fire pension money, for capital projects, and so on and so forth. And when you subtract all of those individual funds that track those different revenue sources, the bottom line is a $40 million general fund, which is what pays for the everyday operating costs of the village. So police officer salaries, firefighter salaries, public works employee salaries, and so forth. And that's how our budget works. And a lot of times people want to know, well, how much money do we have? And these are estimated ending fund balances for 2017 for each of those funds. And again, starting with the most important fund for the village is the general fund, we expect to have a little bit over $14 million in fund balance at the end of 2017, representing about 36% of annual operating expenditures. Our policy requires us to have a minimum of 25%. In case of downturns in the economy, we can rely on that money, or emergencies, unexpected disasters, hopefully that doesn't happen. We have fund balance for those reasons. And in the water and sewer fund, we expect a fund balance of a little bit over $5 million, which is 54% of expenditures. Again, we have the same 25% policy. But that fund balance changes from year to year depending on how many capital projects we're doing in a given year. So you can get an idea, I won't go through each of these, but you can get an idea of where we have our money. I guess the last one that I'll highlight is the Capital Equipment Replacement Fund, and that has about $5.6 million in it to pay for the eventual replacement of vehicles and other related equipment. So I want to talk about where we think we're going to be at the end of 2017. And you'll remember from last year when we did this, we budgeted a surplus of a little over $51,000. It now looks like we're going to end the year with a deficit of about $300,000 roughly, and that number is probably going to change, so don't hold me to it, depending on what happens the rest of the year. And I will talk in a minute about why that's the case. But if that happens, we would end with a $14.3 million fund balance, and our fund balance would drop 1% from the prior year. So here's why. In 2017, our revenue is trending significantly below budget. And in particular, sales tax revenue is down substantially. I generally try to budget revenues in a conservative way, and this year I was a little bit less conservative than I have been and maybe a little bit too optimistic. So I got burned for that. So as a result, we're going to not hit our budget for sales tax revenue. Income tax revenue is down as well, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a few minutes. And there are other sources of revenue, legal settlements, ambulance fees, and so forth that are up that are going to offset some of those losses. Now, one of the reasons that sales tax is down is because of online sales. I'm going to talk some more about that in a minute. And also, the village lost a major sales tax producer this year when the company moved to Buffalo Grove. We also had a restaurant that we were counting on opening this year that has not opened yet. And the state implemented a home rule sales tax administration fee, which of course we were not expecting. And that's also caused our sales tax projections to be lower than, or the sales tax revenue to be lower than projections.
Excuse me, Michael, how much is that fee?
The fee is 2% of our home rule portion of sales tax, so we expect it'll cost us about $76,000 a year.
Thank you.
It doesn't apply to the municipal share of the state sales tax. And then our income tax is down because as part of the dealings in Springfield, they agreed to cut the municipal share of income tax by 10% this year. And we do not expect that there's going to be any growth in income tax even without the 10% cut. So expenditures are trending about $225,000 below budget. That's likely to change too, but that's where we're at right now. And this shows a history of actual results for the general fund, surplus versus deficit. These are not budgeted results. And what you'll see is that for 6 of the last 10 years, we've ended the year with a deficit. We've had a few years where we've ended with surpluses. Some of those surpluses were as a result of one-time use tax transactions that happen from time to time, but that are not predictable. But the fact that we've had deficits for 6 out of 10 years is an indication that we have a structural problem that we need to address. This is despite the fact that, as the village manager referenced earlier, we cut over 38 positions since 2009, which equates to about $3.4 million in annual savings. We've done a lot in terms of consolidating services. The best example of that is probably dispatching with Displanes, but there are many other examples. And despite greater efficiencies and the department's efforts to hold down expenditures, we are still running deficits 60% of the time for the last 10 years. So that's something that we need to address going forward. And as you can see, if we go back to 2007, as a result of this structural problem, we've drawn down on our fund balance from its high in 2007, which was over $20 million and represented 69% of annual operating expenditures, to just over $14 million, which is 36%. And the only reason that this line has flattened out in the last few years is because we have relied on the property tax levy to balance our budgets. Absent those property tax increases, we would have drawn down on our fund balance to a greater extent than what we actually have. So I want to talk about revenue and expenditure trends. And I think the most important point that I can make today is that our major sources of revenue are under attack from many different sources. And it's really unprecedented. It's not like, it's unlike anything that I've ever seen before. But just starting with the income tax, as I mentioned, we are facing a 10% reduction this year as a result of the state's legislation that cut the distribution to all municipalities. That's going to cost us $350,000 and will impact 2 fiscal years. They've already started withholding that money this year, and it will impact 7 months of next fiscal year as well. So 5 months this year, 7 months next year. And in addition to that, Illinois has the worst income growth in the United States. Actually, we're tied with Nevada for the worst income growth in the United States. I have a slide to show that in a minute. That's holding down our income tax receipts. And we're losing population as well to other states. And as I think everyone's aware, and I've referenced, the state approved a 32% increase in the income tax rate this year. And arguably, that could reduce the amount of income tax that we receive in the future because, number one, we don't get a share of any of the 32%. That the state has kept that for themselves. But number two, there's an argument that could be made that that will cause people to leave Illinois as a result because their income taxes are going up. So those are concerns. In terms of sales tax, as I referenced, the state implemented a 2% home rule fee. That's going to cost us $76,000 annually. We have not in the last 8 years seen any growth in sales tax revenue, which is concerning. Online sales is a trend that is here to stay and is going to get worse, I guess, depending on your perspective in the future as more people shop online, and that's impacting our sales tax revenue too. And the way we know that is because our local use tax, although our sales tax revenue is flat for the last 8 years, our local use tax is up nearly 8% a year since 2008. And local use tax is what the village receives from the state of Illinois when people shop online, or they buy a car or something else in another state and bring it back and register it to Illinois. The fact that that's going up while sales tax is flat suggests that the Amazons of the world and the Walmarts of the world are doing more online business, and we're seeing that in the numbers, and I'll get into that in a minute as well.
Hey, Michael, what's the rate of that local use tax? So say if I buy a $100 item at Walmart,
Right.
it's a 10% tax for the state, and we get whatever, our 1% sales tax. What's the rate if I buy the same product on Amazon? What do we get?
So it's a great question. So if you buy something for $100 at Walmart or Target in Wheeling, we get $2. If you buy that same thing at Amazon, we get a fraction of that, maybe less than probably 30 cents or so. I have an example here that's based on a $500 purchase that I'll show you in a minute. But it's remarkable how much less we get in terms of revenue if people shop online. And then finally, in terms of the property tax levy, many of you probably know that in the past week, Senate Bill 81, which is sponsored by Democrats, made it out of committee and is now going to the floor of the House. It would impose a 2-year property tax freeze on all municipalities and all special taxing districts. And if that happens, it would impact us in a very substantial way, as we would not be able to raise our tax levy except in a very limited way for pension costs and for debt service. And we'll talk about that as well. And then the state and local tax deduction is part of the Trump administration's tax reform plan. They are proposing elimination of the deduction for the state and local tax deduction, or state and local tax exemption. So as it stands now, if you itemize your taxes, you are able to deduct your property taxes that you pay in Illinois, income and your income and sales tax as well. The Republicans at the federal level are proposing eliminating the income tax and sales tax deduction. And the reason that that's important is because then in the future, when the village or other taxing districts increase their tax levies, it's going to have a bigger impact on taxpayers who itemize their taxes. So that's something that is of concern as well.
Before Michael moves on, I'd like to make just 2 points and just some things to think about, because there are slides that address both of these things. In the sales tax column, you see the second bullet point says no growth. And I don't think that can be overstated. I mean, think about that. almost 10 years, we've had essentially no growth to speak of, less than 1%. Yet, every year, our costs increase by multiples because we have, obviously, contracts that dictate salary increases, benefit increases, contractual increases. Just the general cost of operations goes up every year. And you'll see that our budget has stagnated. And sometimes I think that can be interpreted as business as usual. But when you have no growth, that stagnation, that flat line that you see, really means that we are absorbing all of the increases by reducing our operating expenses. So again, there are slides that show this in more detail, and Michael's going to talk about sales tax and all that. But again, I don't think that it can be overstated how difficult it is to manage this process in a situation where you've gone 10 years without any growth. The other point, and again, there are slides on this, but I just want something to think about before we get to that stuff. Michael, can you just specifically answer the question, what impact does a tax freeze at the local level have at the state level?
Zero. The state does not collect property tax. That's a local revenue source for school districts and park districts in the villages.
So I'll be the one to be quoted and say it's a sham. A tax freeze does nothing for the state. And we will talk about what the significant impact of a tax freeze does locally. Now, there's certainly, I know Trustee Vito and I have discussed this with Trustee Manche, and there is the idea that the state is in such a situation where maybe a tax freeze will create enough chaos where we kind of blow it up and start over again, and that's a valid point. But the bottom line is it's a sham. A tax freeze at the state tax freeze at the local level will do nothing for the state.
Might just interject something here, and this picks up a good point of what you're talking about. Our sales tax is not going to get any better, especially with what's happening with Amazon. Now they want to move here. People are going to be ordering more and more and more, and not only from Amazon, but all the other online services there are. Maybe it's time for us to look at how we can recoup a portion of that by maybe all these entities that deliver within our community. We're going to have to start paying by the tonnage, paying by something. You guys should get together and look at how can we recoup a portion of that. The services, the UPS, the post office, anybody that's delivering packages in our community have to pay or prove that I don't know how that can be done.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. That, I guess, is a question for Jim Ferrolo, whether or not we can tax delivery services, but I don't think that's currently allowed by the state of Illinois.
Yeah, I don't either. We have to do more research on it, but I agree with you, Michael. I don't think it is currently allowed.
Well, and I would imagine that could be a federal issue, right?
Probably, yeah, interstate commerce and.
Right.
Yeah, crossing state lines, correct.
Right.
Well, didn't they actually say that they're supposed to collect taxes? Nobody's supposed to be selling online without.
That's true.
And it isn't being done.
It's not being done. Amazon started doing it, but it's not being done by every company that sells online.
Very few.
And so that's why when I say that, we're losing money to online sales, there's no doubt, because if they're not collecting it, they're certainly not remitting it to the state of Illinois.
I think it's time you guys put your collective heads together
Yeah.
and come up with an answer for that. Thank you.
Excuse me, one other question. As far as, and I think it's Senate Bill 851, not 81, what can people who aren't filing witness slips do? And who do we call? What do we do to say, we don't want this property tax freeze? Is there a way to contact somebody?
The bill is sponsored by a Democrat representative out of Schaumburg, whose name escapes me. Mussman.
Yeah.
It is also co-sponsored by our very own John Carroll, who is the new state rep who took the place of Elaine Nekritz. So he represents Wheeling. Absolutely, you can contact his office to express your concern and your opinion on the bill. His contact information should be on our website.
Because this doesn't just affect Wheeling, this affects every municipality.
Everyone.
Every school district who, people need to stand up and voice their opinions.
Right. Yeah, and it impacts the school districts and the other special taxing districts like the park and the county and so forth to a greater extent because they already deal with the property tax cap and they have limitations on how much they can increase their tax levy every year. So by freezing taxes, that they can never recover that money. So.
Thank you. Michael?
Yeah.
Excuse me, one last on this comment. Maybe you could speak to the property tax freeze proposal and how, certainly that I work here in this capacity. Yesterday I got my email that said that this bill went out of committee, and I happened to be standing with colleagues at work. And I went, oh. And they're like, oh no, what happened? And I went, it looks like a property tax freeze is going to move forward through through Springfield. And they're like, that's great.
Sure.
How do I explain how not great that is without making people feel maybe insulted that they don't understand how a tax freeze really is what John said, a big, huge, magical.
I think it's a normal response because nobody wants to pay more taxes.
Right.
But the reality is, I think we have to continue to stress that that is a major source of revenue for every municipality and every school district in the state. And they need that money to provide core services. In our case, it's police, fire, public works, and so forth. In the school districts, it's obvious, it's teachers. And without that money, some of these taxing districts are going to be looking at laying off people. The schools, I'm sure, are going to have a significant issue on their hands. And, like it or not, we all take advantage of those services and depend on those services, so you don't really think about it too much until it hits you. And, I think that's what I would probably
I have
stress.
carefully said things like, well, you'll understand the impact when it takes a firefighter 20 minutes to get to your house and put out the fire.
Right.
Because we don't have that many firefighters, or we had to sell an ambulance to pay for the ones we had. It's
Right.
just a massive shell game to make sure that you get what you deserve as a resident of this community.
Right.
Thanks.
There is a general perception issue, and that's exactly what you're pointing out, in that people see the state of the state, they see whatever their opinion is on the state of the country. One of our biggest challenges is that whatever people's perceptions are of the general category of government, we're the ones that kind of suffer that the most because we are the direct link to government for residents, obviously. But when we talk about all of these financial crises, look at what the state has done, or maybe more importantly, hasn't done to correct the bleeding, as it were, and then look at what we have done. We have already eliminated 40 positions. I mean, that's significant when you talk about we only have 230. We are looking at another significant number now, again, concentrating on attrition. But we are being proactive. We are not in a position to stand here and say the sky is falling yet, because it's not. But what we're trying to do is make sure that it doesn't. And I don't know that the county or the state or the federal government is being as proactive as we are. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we face. And when people ask that question, they just look at the nice building and us sitting up here with an $80 million number saying, I don't know what the big deal is. $80 million, you can't coast for another year? Well, no. And there is detail as to why the answer to that is no. But I do think that the perception is the biggest thing.
Michael, one last thing. In your thing here on page 30, under the bottom line of revenues, you're projecting for next year a $3.4 million deficit over what we projected or what we ended up with last year. Which one of these three categories is the major contributor to that deficit?
Are you looking at the total budget?
Total budget.
Yeah, it really, that's a difficult comparison to make from year to year because that includes capital funds that fluctuate and TIF funds and so forth. So it's not 3.4 million in the general fund, thankfully, but it's the overall budget.
Okay.
Yeah, I just don't want to give the impression that we're all unanimous against a tax freeze. I do believe in the long term it's good. However, this particular bill, I agree with Manager Sfondilis, is a sham. There's a reason it's coming out from Mussman and Carroll. They're the two top targets of the Republican Party to knock seats out of the Democratic legislature. And that's why they're sponsoring it, so they can run in 2018 and say, we sponsored a tax freeze. I get it. The problem is, though, the tax freeze in general will then force, if it was permanent the way that the government proposed it, it would force municipalities and the legislature to then actually come to the systemic problem, which you stated is the actual problem, the structural problem, to start addressing the pension issue. An alternative to that is to change the way that the taxes are done in general, to go away from a levy system into something more of an income tax system, to where you're taxing on a percentage of property value as opposed to continuing that levy every year. That's never been proposed. And I'm kind of disappointed with I'm very disappointed with the Northwest Municipal Conference. All we ever see for their calls to actions are anytime anybody tries to touch their money. They never are proactive in saying, well, let's propose a constitutional amendment that says we can move pensions into 401k systems. Let's propose a constitutional amendment or push our legislators who we're buddies with all the time to say we should change the way that the levy system works. They never do that. All they ever say is, oh my God, they're coming for my money. So I just would like us here to be long-term and think a little bit more outside the box. Thank you.
If I may, just for the record, we actually wrote a white paper on pension reform. It's pretty amazing and does exactly what you said without the need for a constitutional amendment. But your points are all valid and well taken. I just wanted to add that the conference did issue a white paper on complete reform to the pension system and has fallen on complete deaf ears at the state level.
All right.
But to validate what you're saying, I think you're right. If the state were to undertake serious reform in terms of revenue, then a property tax freeze, wouldn't be such a big deal. But to freeze property taxes and then not provide us with any other means of raising revenue is really where the problem lies. Right. And a permanent property tax freeze without, as you pointed out, some kind of offsetting income tax revenue or something like that would be devastating, not only to the Village of Wheeling, but every other, taxing body out there. So it would take, a major structural reform of our tax system to address what you're talking about.
Yeah. Do you have that white paper, John? Can you send it to me?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't know how it gets done without a constitutional amendment, because even that Band-Aid that Necritz proposed that was very limited in its reforms was still deemed unconstitutional under the pension clause. So I don't know how anything...
I'll send it to you and we can
right.
discuss further, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Just quickly, this slide shows the village's share of the state's sales tax revenue. This is not home rule sales tax, but it illustrates the point that we made earlier, which is if you go back to 2008 and you compare that to 2017, there's been really no growth, especially when you adjust for inflation. We're actually bringing in less revenue than we did back then. And the same thing can be said of our income tax revenue. Going back to 2008, we brought in $3.6 million. 2017, we expect to be 3.4. Now, some of that is because of the 10% cut, but if you look at 2016 numbers and compare those to 2008, that line could not be much flatter than it actually is. And so it causes you to want to drink, right?
But we're bringing in, we're building a lot of new homes and bringing in a bigger population.
Yes.
I understand that we won't see that money until a census is in
Right.
2020,
Right.
right?
That's right. You know, as you know, every 10 years there's a census. The Illinois Department of Revenue will receive the information from the 2020 census and start distributing based on our hopefully higher population in 2021.
And is it, sometimes you do a special census to recoup some of that.
Right.
It's too late in the
I think it's
in the
too
game
late at
to
this
do
point.
something like
Yeah,
that.
I don't think it would be, I don't think the cost-benefit ratio would be there, you know, in terms of what it would cost to do a special census.
But we should get, you know, after the census, we should get a pretty good uptick because we have been building on our population.
We should. I would think we would get at least another couple $100,000 in revenue annually as a result of an increase in population. So getting back to the online sales issue, as we talked about, you know, there's been headlines on the internet and in newspapers about online sales. And, you know, Walmart expects that their sales are going to explode next year. They're obviously in a war with Amazon. Amazon's sales are up more than every other business combined. And the U.S. Census Bureau has been tracking e-commerce sales growth at around 15.5% a year. And the final one that I put up here is that U.S. online retail sales are expected to surpass $1 trillion by 2027. It's at $445 billion currently. So the point here is that obviously this is going to continue to be an issue, and it's something that I think a lot of us have done. We've purchased online. It's you know, no one should be shamed for doing that, but the reality is that it does impact our revenue stream. And so what I was talking about earlier in terms of if you compare our sales tax growth, excuse me, to our local use tax, you'll see that really for the last several years we've had very little sales tax growth. The last couple of years have been negative. But our local use tax is growing substantially every year and has been since 2011. And getting back to Trustee Vito's question about a purchase, I used a $500 example instead of a $100 example. But if you were to go to the Target in Wheeling and buy something for $500, the village would get 2% or $10. But if you buy that same item online with Amazon, we get roughly 0.37%. or $1.85. So it's a substantial difference. And when you look at our budget for local use tax is just under $1 million. We don't get that much in local use tax from the state of Illinois relative to how much we bring in sales tax every year, which is about $10 million. So there's no disputing that this is going to be an issue for us going forward. And actually, getting back to Trustee Vito's point about how revenue is raised in Illinois, this is something that's going to have to be addressed because this is not unique to Wheeling. Every municipality that has a mall or has major sales tax revenue is going to be dealing with the same problem, and the state's going to have to do something about that because they're all going to be in the same boat that we are. Some of them to a greater extent because they rely on sales tax more than we do. Income tax, as I alluded to earlier, is not growing. I put this chart up here when we talked about the audit a few months ago, and you can see Illinois' income tax since 2007 is the worst in the nation compared to Nevada, or as is Nevada, I should say, but compared to the rest of the nation. And as people leave Illinois, the people leaving are people who are making more money than the people who are coming in. And so the differential, Illinois is number one in terms of that differential, which is not a good thing to be number one at. And I got this information from the Illinois Policy Institute, so full disclosure there. So this was in the budget letter, but I thought it was important to put it up there again. These are our major sources of revenue, comparing 2016 actual receipts to 2008 actual receipts. I've excluded any one-time use tax transactions from the sales tax figure, but same theme continues here. We've had $88,000 in growth in our sales tax revenue since 2008. And again, not adjusting for inflation, those are real dollars. And same thing can be said for income tax, it's up $14,000. Telecom tax is down nearly $800,000 as people get rid of their landlines. We're not collecting that source of revenue. And the bottom line, you can see all the individual changes, but the bottom line is that we are collecting about $200,000 more than we did back then. And that translates to less than 1% growth for that 8-year period, or 0.11% per year for each year. It's about as flat as you can get. And at the same time,
What was the big downturn in towing charges? That seemed kind of strange, 150.
in towing charges,
Yeah.
you know, from what I understand, Uber is a factor. If you go out and you party and you drink, you know, fewer people are, and this is a good thing, fewer people are getting in their cars and driving, they're calling Uber, and as a result, we're not arresting them and we're not collecting those towing charges. I would defer, I don't know if the police chief has anything else to say about that, but that's my understanding.
Generally, last year, arrests were down, traffic arrests were down. In the last 2 months, we've seen a significant increase. It's just one of those vagrancies where just up and down versus weather and officers on patrol and new officers out there. And there's no real, you'd have to look at the long-term number, not just a snapshot of, 1 year to capture total data.
Thank you.
So when you compare our revenue and the fact that it's not up to our expenditures, and what I did here was I compared salaries for our 3 biggest departments from 2008 to 2016, excuse me, and health insurance and pension costs. And overall, you can see that our costs are rising by over 5% a year while our revenue is flat. A lot of that has to do with our police, fire, and IMRF pension costs which are up substantially since 2008. And that's certainly not an indictment of pensions or the people that earn those benefits. It's just the numbers are what they are.
Aren't you paying more these past few years into the pension funds to try to catch up?
Yes, the board adopted a policy a couple years ago that when we end the year with a surplus, we consider contributing that to the pension funds. And over the last 2 years, we've contributed $1,250,000 of revenue that otherwise would not have gone to the pension fund.
So that number is a little bit high.
Well, these numbers don't include those additional contributions.
Okay.
So the reality is this is something that every community is facing. Pension costs are going up, and it's a real challenge because it makes it difficult to pay for other services.
And until there's change at the state level, it's also something we can't control.
Right.
I think that's important for the public to understand.
So the question is, and this was raised by Village Manager Spondilis and our fire chief too, is, well,
I'm understanding. Just for the general public, would you
Yeah.
please, I'm sorry,
no, it's okay.
just for the benefit of general public, would you please explain what it means to require the pension funds to be 100% funded?
Sure, there is a law in Illinois that says that the pension funds, police and fire in particular, have to be at least 90% funded by 2040. And so every year when we make a contribution to the pension funds, we're paying the normal cost, which is the cost of the benefits that are currently being earned, plus a payment towards the unfunded liability, which is what we owe the pension fund because for the benefits that have been earned in the past that are not funded.
And more specifically, if we hire somebody June 1st of this year, I'm just picking a random day. I don't know if anybody's hired that day. If we hire a first responder June 1st of this day, we have to fund his retirement portion of the pension, correct?
Right. We start to make contributions to the pension fund for those individuals that are hired.
Even if he's going to put in 20, 25 years.
Right. Right. And, you know, in fairness to the firefighters and police officers and everybody else, they're making contributions as well, but the lion's share of it comes from the village.
Thank you.
Michael, can you explain how we, and it's not just Wheeling, I think it's all municipalities, at least from what I've read, got to a point where our pension funds are not at a level of 90% funded. Why we're down at the 76, 80%?
Yeah, it has to do really with demographics and investment returns for the most part. So, obviously people are living longer than they used to, and so that means that people will collect pension benefits for much longer than was the case maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago. And that leads to a higher liability. But in addition to that, the Village of Wheeling assumes every year that we're going to get a 7.5% investment return on our pension funds. And historically, that has not been the case. So while we expect to receive all this additional revenue at a 7.5% pace, we've fallen short of that, and that increases our liability in the long term.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question? Okay.
The problem is, though, changing that expectation, because we've had this conversation, lowering that expectation is something more realistic, like 6.5%, I believe was $1 million.
Yeah, I have a slide for that, so we will get to that. But yes, if you change the investment return assumption to lower it, which is a good thing, it forces you to put more money in each year, and that's difficult to do while you're running deficit budgets.
But at the same point, if you don't, you're putting your head in the sand and pretending that you're going to get something
That's
that
right.
it's
That's
just
right.
not going to come.
And you're kicking the can down the road. So what happens is that future taxpayers who may not even live in Wheeling now, but may move into Wheeling in the future, are going to have to make up that difference. So we'll talk about that. But the question is Wheeling alone? We're dealing with all of these difficult revenue situations and expenditure situations. Are we alone? And I wanted to make the point that no, we're not. This is something that a lot of communities are struggling with. And there was an article in Governing Magazine back in September which really hits on the point that we've been talking about. And that is that even though the U.S. economy is improving, and we saw that with all of those slides, cities are still looking at the possibility of another downturn. They made the point in this article that cities still have not recovered from the recession. And there is a new report that concludes that there may be another fiscal contraction. This, I thought, was really interesting. Last year, city revenues were expected to finally rebound from the Great Recession, but the reality fell short. Revenues reached just 98% of what they were in 2006. And that's exactly what I've been trying to demonstrate to you today that we're dealing with. And further down in the article, they made the point that as more major retailers close their doors and people buy goods and services online, which is often tax-free, as Trustee Brady pointed out, the sales tax is capturing less and less economic activity. And to Trustee Vito's point, that's going to be something that the state has to address, because we have to be able to raise revenue to pay for services. And if the sales tax is not doing it, it has to come from somewhere else. So there have been a number of stories in the newspapers recently about other communities, and I thought it was important to talk about that. Cary was in the headlines in August. They have a $700,000 budget deficit, and their village administrator said that the overall message here is that we're going to have to make some tough decisions. And then he went on to say, I understand it's not what you want to hear, but it's the facts and reality. And in Springfield, their sales tax revenue is shrinking, which is a familiar theme. They're projecting sales tax to continue its downward slide, contributing to a possible $3.6 million structural deficit in their budget. And again, you'll see that word structural come up more than once. Evanston is facing a multi-million-dollar budget crunch. Their city manager said that their revenue shortfalls and expense increases could leave them with a deficit of more than $5 million, even though they've already cut $2.5 million out of the budget, which is something that the Village of Wheeling has done as well, even more than $2.5 million. And then Bartlett is considering increasing their home rule sales tax rate to fix an $800,000 deficit. And so, they're dealing with the same kind of problems. But there's more. There's Peoria, which has rising pension costs and declining sales tax revenues. And their city manager asked the department heads to present plans detailing the impact of 5% and 10% budget reductions because they're facing a $7.9 million shortfall. And in Elgin, the city manager said that the city will be facing a crossroads, and the council will have to decide to continue to invest in the city and services it provides or retreat and offer less. And then finally, in Rockford, they're dealing with a financial crisis too, and this goes to the points that we've already discussed. Their finance director, told the alderman that without significant changes, she expects a $10.2 million general fund deficit by the end of the year. Her goal, or by the end of 2018, her goal is structural corrections to the budget. And I highlighted this. She went on to say that although the city's revenue is growing, it can't keep pace with spending. Sales tax revenues have rebounded, but have not returned to levels seen before the Great Recession. Same story as we're dealing with. And revenues overall are growing at 2% a year, while pension and employee costs continue to climb at more than 3% a year. And so, it's a very simple equation. If revenues are not keeping pace with expenditures, that's when you end up with a deficit budget. So I wanted to do a little bit of benchmarking just to show you that the Village of Wheeling is very efficient in terms of its delivery of services. And these slides have been updated this year to show that if you look at general fund expenditures, you will see that there are no communities on this list that spend less providing core services than the Village of Wheeling. And granted, some of these communities are much larger than Wheeling, but if you look at the ones that are very similar in population, like Glenview, Northbrook, Buffalo Grove, and even Palatine, you will see that we spend less on core services than they do.
Can you stay on that slide for a second?
Sure.
Just piggybacking on what you had said earlier about revenues and expenditures, it may seem easy then to say, well, okay, you don't have the revenue, just cut your expenditures, which in this case means bodies. But obviously, we are here for a reason. We can't go out of business, number one, right? People pay taxes and they expect a certain level of service. And in order to provide that level of service, you need a certain amount of people. There's probably no more important slide in this entire presentation than this one, because this really is when people say, well, I don't know, Wheeling, have you really pulled up your bootstraps and done what you need to do? Think about, we all know these communities, and this is certainly no negative towards them, but while there is some fluctuation and certainly an emphasis on population that can't be ignored, like Michael said, look at some of the communities that are essentially the same size we are. They don't provide different services than we do. We all basically provide the same thing. There are nuances, of course, but there's an argument to be made that even with us having the lowest number on this list, we have services that some other communities don't. It cannot be overemphasized how important this slide is to show the idea of responsibility when it comes to the way the Village of Wheeling spends its money and has tried to get ahead of the situation that we are in and looking forward, because we've spent 10 years getting here. And again, I think this is the slide that everyone should be the most proud of, because it shows the public how we are spending the money. And the only way that people really get an understanding of that is to look at how it compares to their neighbors.
And one thing we're not doing as well is hiding a tax in some other, a vehicle sticker, a raised food and beverage tax. We're not doing things like that either to hide that tax into something else and still collect money somewhere and still collect it from the residents. So
that is an excellent point, and one that really, if we were to institute a village sticker, which of course we are not suggesting, but that's $1 million right there annually. I mean, that would go a long way to fixing our problems. But it is the recognition of your point that we wouldn't suggest that.
It's really that much? How much do those things go for? That's a lot of money.
I didn't over-exaggerate that. It's just shy of $1 million.
Vehicle stickers, sure.
Yeah.
How much does an average vehicle sticker cost?
Well, you can obviously set the price
easy, let's not talk
at
about
any.
Well, I mean,
You can set the price at any rate you want. I know the city of Chicago is very high. I don't know, Mike, if you know what the city of Chicago charges, but
Yeah, it's very high. It's over $100.
yeah. But there are communities that are 25, 35, 50, but I think to the manager's point, you can certainly set it at a rate where you could easily collect $1 million a year.
yeah, no, I'm not proposing it. I'm just shocked at
Yeah.
that.
Now, of course, there's an offset because it's not a full-time position, but it is certainly an imposition and has an impact on the finance department to administer the program. So there is a cost offset there, but the income is just shy of $1 million.
Yeah, we've talked about it in the past, and it's never been a popular subject with the village board, and it's really the least efficient way to raise revenue that I can think of. It's an inconvenience to the residents. It's difficult for staff. It's just not great.
Yeah, I'm not for it. I was just shocked at that number.
Yeah.
Michael, do we have any numbers that indicate the cost per resident based on the 2010 census? So what if you took Wheeling divided by our 38,455, whatever the number is, resident, that would tell us, pardon me?
Be $1,000.
Yeah.
It's just under $1,000.
Just under, yeah, but I'm
Right.
also looking for the other communities to say what their cost per.
On a per capita basis.
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't prepare that, but we could certainly do that.
I was just curious.
Yeah. I think what becomes difficult, I've done that actual slide in the past, but I got rid of it, and the reason is because, our expenditures don't track all that closely with population. There's certainly a correlation between the two, but there's not, you don't need that many more employees just because you have 5,000 more people than you do, if you have 5,000 fewer people. So I've always felt like it's not a great metric, but I can certainly, prepare that for you to take a look at.
Thank you.
And then looking at the other side of the equation, revenues, you'll see that we bring in less in terms of revenue than all of our neighbors. And again, population is a factor, but some of these other communities are similar to Wheeling and yet bring in more revenue than we do. And comparing sales tax collections, and again, this is just the state, our share of the state tax, not the home rule tax, because that differs from community to community. But you'll see that other than Buffalo Grove, excuse me, these other communities are bringing in more in sales tax revenue, and that's a challenge for us as well. And then this is property tax revenue by community. And there are communities that are significantly lower, Niles being the most obvious example, significantly lower than Wheeling. However, that has to do with the fact that they're bringing in a substantial amount of money in sales tax, so they don't need to raise their tax levy to the same extent that communities like Wheeling do. But even with that, we're still on the low end. And then finally, I just wanted to compare full-time sworn police, fire, and public works employees. I left everybody else out of the equation because there are differences from community to community in terms of whether or not they do dispatching and whether they, and so it becomes very difficult to do an apples-to-apples comparison that way. But if you just focus on sworn police and fire and public works employees, you'll see that we are tied with Niles for the least amount of employees. So moving on to pension funding, and this is some more benchmarking. This is where we were at as of 12/31/2016 in terms of our pension funds. And this is police, fire, and IMRF, and it's based on the state of Illinois' actuarial reports and IMRF's actuarial report. And it shows you our funding status compared to our neighbors. We are right at about the average, which is 69%. Our pension funds are 69% funded in aggregate. And that is lower, as you'll see, than Glenview, Arlington Heights, and Buffalo Grove, which have better funded pensions. This continues to be an ongoing challenge for every community in Illinois, and it's a challenge for us too. So I just wanted to give you an idea of where we are relative to our neighbors. And if you look at the unfunded liabilities, this is in millions of dollars how much these communities owe to their pension funds. Again, police, fire, and IMRF. This slide paints a better picture for Wheeling, because if you live in one of these other communities, your community, even though the pension funds are might be a little bit better funded, you still owe more in terms of dollars to your pension funds. So Des Plaines is leading the bunch, which is not a good thing. They owe $147 million to their pension funds. Wheeling is about $59 million. And the average without Wheeling is $94.5 million. This is, to Trustee Papanto's point earlier, this is money that has to be paid at some point in the future. And if we're not making the contributions now, we're just going to make bigger contributions later. If you total all of the liabilities for these, I think it's 9 or so communities, in aggregate, these communities owe $815 million to their pension funds, which of course is just short of $1 billion, and that's just 9 communities. If you think about that in terms of the entire state of Illinois, what that number would be, and I don't have that number, but I'm sure I could probably get it, it's staggering, the amount of money that's owed to pension funds. And on a per capita basis, I did do per capita in this instance, if every resident in Wheeling, man, woman, and child, had to write a check to pay off our pension debt, they would have to write a check for $1,562, and you can see what it would be in other communities. So before we're done here today, I'm going to ask you all to get out your checkbooks and write us a check now. Not really. But the average without Wheeling is almost $2,000 per person. And then talking again about the investment return assumptions by community, as I said, Wheeling is at 7.5%. That's really on the high end. Arlington Heights is closer to where we should be. Ideally, I think we would be at 6 to 6.5, probably, or less. But reducing our investment return assumption has a significant impact on the contribution that we have to make each year. These are investment returns from police and fire pension funds for the last 2 years. And this gets to the point that we are assuming a 7.5% annual return. For the last 2 years, our police and fire pension funds have earned just over 3%, which of course is not even close to what we're assuming we're going to get, and that increases our long-term liability.
Michael, What would the effect be if we ticked it down a point every year?
I have a slide for that.
Yeah, all right, thanks.
So hold on just 1 minute, I'll get there. But if you look at our last 10 years of returns, because 2 years is not long enough to really make a point, but if you look at 10 years, interestingly enough, police and fire are exactly tied, even though they have separate investment managers. They've produced the same 10-year results, 5.77%. IMRF has earned 6.91%. But even over a 10-year period, that's not close to 7.5.
Are those numbers due to the fact that in 2007 and, excuse me, possibly part of 2008, the returns were staggering?
Yeah, and we're still recovering from that. But in recent years, we're up, the stock market is up significantly. And yet we're still not hitting 7.5%. A lot of that has to do with the fact that there's a limitation in Illinois on how much pension funds can invest in stock versus fixed income securities. And so even if the stock market is doing really well, you probably only have 55% of your money in the stock market. And if the bond market is producing returns of 1 or 2%, it's dragging down your total return to the point that you're not getting to 7.5%.
Michael, I just want to be clear. The investments that we're investing in, those are limited by the state on what we can invest in and how much we can invest in certain funds?
Yes, you're limited in how, the pension funds are limited in how much they can invest in stock and other types of investments. For village funds, we can't invest in the stock market at all, which is probably a good thing because we have to pay salaries. But pension funds can invest to a limit of 55%.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so getting back to Trustee Vogel's question. So if we changed our investment return assumption, this is what the impact would be. In terms of our total liability, not necessarily in terms of what our annual contribution would be, but in terms of our total liability. So at 7.5, we're at about 50 million for just police and fire. By the way, we have no control over what IMRF's investment return assumption is. Theirs is 7.5, but that's set by IMRF. So the only thing we can control is police and fire. If we were to raise that to 8.5%, which is a really bad idea, we would then only have on paper $34 million of liability. But if we lower it to 6.5%, our liability goes up to almost $70 million. And the impact on an annual basis, it would be to add at least a few $100,000 when we've looked at this in the past, probably in the ballpark of $200,000 to $400,000 of additional contributions that we would have to make to these two pension funds if we lowered our investment return assumption. So that, as I said, is difficult to do when you already have a deficit budget. But it's something that the village could consider.
I mean, aren't all these numbers pie in the sky? I mean, this is the first time I ever heard that we had to be 50% that these funds had to be 50% invested in bonds. I mean, when are you ever going to get 7%, 6% return on a portfolio if you're half invested in conservative assets?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's very, very difficult, if not impossible. I mean, in the 90s, for those of us old enough to remember the 90s, we were seeing stock market returns of sometimes 30% a year. And so we could hit that number back then, but now we live in a new reality where, you're not seeing those kind of returns from the stock market, and certainly not long term.
Yeah, because the last 2 years we had, what, 3% you had on that? I mean,
3%,
the market's
right.
been on a tear.
Right, that's right.
So I don't know how we ever hit 6.5, or when the last time we did.
Well, as I indicated, I mean, for 10 years we haven't hit 6.5%. We haven't gotten to 6. We're close.
Yeah.
But so ideally, if we were to change our return assumption, it would probably be closer to 6% or maybe even lower.
Yeah.
but that would have a substantial impact on our property tax levy.
Right.
So, okay, the proposed budget, I assumed that our village president would approve this, even though that might not be the case. And just real quickly, and we can come back to this later, we are going to spend almost $8.9 million in capital improvement projects next year, $1.7 million in street improvements. We have $875,000 earmarked for renovation of Fire Station 23. You can see some of the other things that are on the list. Trustee Vogel thinks this is a great idea. And we've got money for the diversionary channel bridge, which is coming out of TIF funds. You'll also notice, going back to the drainage improvement projects, that we are starting to spend a significant amount of money on stormwater projects, and that's a result of the board's action to implement a stormwater program and fee. We now have the revenue that we need to start to address those problems in Wheeling. The TIF district that encompasses Industrial Lane, we have money spent there for money budgeted for water and sewer improvements that would not be possible without that TIF district. So there's a lot of good things that are happening that we should be proud of. And we have only 2 expanded level requests this year that have been approved by the village manager. We can talk about those in more detail later. But they only amount to $8,000, which is a lot less than it has been in prior years. And we have a number of other requests that have been made by departments, including the finance department, that were not approved by the manager. Those only total $88,000, and we can certainly get into that later. Trustee Vito is.
I'm glad I'm stopped spending.
He's upset about this.
Thank you.
Yeah, he's very upset.
Thank
You
you.
recognize yourself, huh?
Michael, can I make a quick note?
Yeah.
Those last couple of slides that you saw about all the capital projects, it's probably a good opportunity just to talk a little bit about balance. So we've heard about all the struggles and all the challenges and how revenues are down, and then here you go and you see all these slides where we're spending millions of dollars on infrastructure and capital improvements, and maybe more for the public necessarily than for the village board. But this is what we mean by looking long-term and being able to forecast our revenues and balance it against our expenditures, yes, but it's easy to look at some of these capital projects and just say, well, why don't you just take some of that money and use that to balance your budget? And in some cases you can do that, in others you can't. But the point isn't, again, about short term. This is about making sure that we are able to serve our citizens and our businesses. And the only way that we can do that is to be fiscally responsible in our policy decisions, whether that's SURF or pension liabilities or any of our operating policies, but also to make sure that we continue to keep up with infrastructure and not create a situation that a board 20 years from now is going to have to deal with in bonding millions of dollars for streets because it has been ignored throughout the years. That is exactly what got us to this point, really, with the pensions and other decisions made by agencies that we have no control over. So this is, when I talked earlier about being responsible, this is what I meant by that. You still have to be able to allocate the appropriate funding in order to maintain. I would still consider this a service level. Yes, these are capital assets, but it's still a service level. There's a direct impact to the public. So I just wanted to address that and the idea of balance when it comes to looking at these giant numbers for capital projects and maybe just saying, well, this is easy. Just, don't do any water sewer improvements for a year. And maybe that's a great example because it's a different fund and doesn't count anyway. But I just wanted to bring that up about how important it is to look at the big picture and how all these things fit together in order to get us where we're at today and some of the recommendations we're making.
Okay, and then I think overtime is an important subject to address because people are typically interested in that and concerned about overtime, but I think to the credit of our departments, and this is really the three major departments, overtime has been basically flat for the last 5 years. They've done a very good job of managing that, and there's always going to be overtime. It's not something that you can avoid. Every community has it, but I think we do a good job of managing it. And then the other good news is our workers' comp and general liability program, which is a self-funding program. We fund to a certain limit for workers' comp and general liability claims, and then we buy excess insurance for claims that are over that limit. If you wanted to come up with a chart to describe how self-funding works, you probably couldn't come up with a better chart than this, because what it shows is that we have typical years where we have about $300,000 to $400,000 in claim losses, and then every once in a while we have a bad year. And that's how this is supposed to work. Most of the years are pretty okay, and then you fund for the bad year that happens every once in a while. So for the last 3 years, our claims have been relatively low, and I think that's a credit to our departments and their training programs and their emphasis on safety. I think it's paying off. As far as the water and sewer fund budget is concerned, we don't talk about it much because it's well funded. And it's well funded in large part because we've done annual incremental increases to our water and sewer rates every year for many, many years. Next year, we're proposing what basically amounts to a 1.5% increase in our water and sewer rates. Because of rounding, it's actually 1.47, but it's 11 cents per 1,000 gallons. It would cost the average resident $9.24 next year if they're using 7,000 gallons per month. And it's necessary to continue to increase our rates for our ongoing capital improvement program, water and sewer improvement program, to be able to make repairs and replacement of our water and sewer system.
Michael, are those incremental increases pretty consistent for all those years?
There have been years
where you go up.
Yeah, we try to avoid but there have been years where it's been more like 3 or 4%. This is lower than it typically is.
What would drive a 3 or 4%?
The level of capital projects that we're expecting within the next 5 years. So if we're planning on doing more than we typically do, we would probably ask for...
Like the meter replacement program or something?
Right. We would probably ask
Which we already did, but...
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. And our water sales have been fairly consistent, although this chart seems to indicate that there are ups and downs. It's really a little misleading because we sell about 1.2 billion gallons of water a year, and that's been holding pretty steady for the last few years. And then, as we mentioned before, the stormwater fund, when we implemented that fee in early 2016, it was at $2 per ERU. We increased it to $2.25 last year. We're recommending increasing it another 25 cents to $2.50 this year. That would generate another $75,000 for the stormwater fund. Our rate is substantially lower than our neighbors. Buffalo Grove, I think, just implemented a rate that was in the $5 or $6 per ERU range, which is not unusual. Our thought was we would start low and we would increase it over time to try to phase it in and avoid the shock value of a new fee. And so that's why we're recommending another quarter cent in 25-cent increase is what I'm trying to say.
So with the increase in the water charge and this, you're talking $12 to $15 a year for most residents?
Right, right.
Thank you.
Something in that ballpark. And then the property tax levy, we have proposed an increase next year of $735,000. Getting back to the property tax freeze issue, if if that gets approved by the state, that would limit our increase. Instead of $735,000, the most that we could really raise would be about $124,000 in revenue, because the legislation as currently written allows for an increase for your debt service levies and your police and fire pension levies, but only to the extent that the increase in the CPI has occurred, and that this year is 2.1%. So we expect our police, fire, and IMRF pension costs to go up $185,000 next year, which is 4.5%. That wouldn't even cover that increase. We would still be lower than that, and our debt is expected to go up $146,000 a year. So for a total between the two of $331,000. So you can see that if there is a property tax freeze, even with a small increase, we won't be able to cover just our pension and debt service costs.
So they changed it, they changed the amount that we could increase it to CPI?
It's 5% or CPI, whichever is less. So it's basically what they've done is they've mirrored the language of the PTEL law, which limits all of the other taxing districts to whatever the increase is in the CPI or 5%. So they've done that in this legislation here too. So as a home rule community, we're not subject to PTEL, the property tax cap, but this would be the first time that in some way it would be applied to us. And then I wanted to just give you kind of a snapshot of how our property tax levy has changed from 2004 to 2018 as proposed. And I think this is really interesting. I tried to highlight a couple of the changes. In 2004, we levied $8.1 million in property taxes, and we're proposing this year to levy $15.4 million. So that's an increase of $7.2 million in new property tax revenue over that period of time. What you'll see here is that because of the increases in pension costs, and again, police, fire, and IMRF over the years, the majority of that new revenue, the $7.2 million, is going to the pension funds. And again, I don't want to get angry emails, and this is not an indictment of pensions, it's just the facts, and these are not alternative facts, these are real facts. More and more money is going to our pension funds, and that means that there's less money available for general operating purposes. And so as we struggle to balance our budget each year, this is one of the reasons, is when we increase our levy, a lot of it goes to the pension funds. Here's a chart that shows our share of the property tax bill. You'll notice that back in 2001, our share of the total tax bill was 10.3%. That has risen to 13.55% as we've been forced to increase our levy in order to try to balance our budget. But I think it's important to keep in mind all of the services that the Village of Wheeling provides, and I've tried to list those on the left here. We provide a lot of services for the property taxes that people pay. And then I wanted to sort of end on a more positive note by talking about all the really good things that are going on in Wheeling. And certainly from a financial standpoint, we have high bond ratings, AA plus with Fitch and AA with S&P. We have not issued any new tax levy related debt in the last 8 years. We pay for our capital equipment replacement costs and our capital improvement projects on a pay-as-you-go basis, which a lot of communities do not. They issue debt for those purposes, which increases the long-term cost to their taxpayers. We have had liability and workers' comp claims that are lower than average for the last 3 years. Our pension funding, even though it's not where it should be, is up from last year. We're better funded than we were a year ago. We implemented a stormwater fund to reduce flooding in Wheeling. Our water rates are lower than 84% of 162 suburbs surveyed by the Chicago Tribune recently, which I think is significant. We continue to receive the Distinguished Budget Award and the Certificate of Achievement. We have made significant progress on relocating the Fox Point residents to safer homes that are not located in the floodway, which is a substantial accomplishment, a win-win for everybody involved. We're working cooperatively with the Park District to integrate our senior center recreation programs. The fire department has implemented new programs that, or is in the process of implementing new programs that will reduce calls for service without compromising safety. Our police department is reaching out to the community to increase communication, and we have seen increased participation in a lot of the programs that they are involved in. Public Works Department is managing a multi-million-dollar infrastructure program, and we are seeing a lot of improvements to our infrastructure and maintaining our existing infrastructure. We have, of course, the Town Center project, which is really the envy of a lot of our neighbors, and we get calls from our neighbors asking how we did it and what we're doing. And we're talking now about Uptown 500 or 501. I'm not sure what they're calling it these days, but that's will be a significant project for the village. Our fire department recently was awarded an ISO Class 2 rating, which is one of the highest ratings you can achieve. And so there's a lot to be proud of. And the village manager asked me, I know it's been going on for a long time, he asked me to end with an educational piece that I've presented in the past about the property tax levy and shifting tax burdens. So this is the last thing that I have. I think this is important for the public to know how property taxes are paid and who pays them. So you've seen this before, I know, but we'll go through it quickly. And what we did was we created a imaginary town called the Village of Spondylisville. It consists of only 4 homes and 2 businesses to make this as simple as possible, but it provides all of the normal core services. And it has an annual budget of $100,000. And so there are no other sources of revenue. The village levies $100,000 in property taxes each year to offset its $100,000 in expenses. There's no other taxing districts. Spondylisville has really one of the best village boards of any nearby community. And everyone in the town is a White Sox fan, which tells you that it is really the perfect community.
Except for the namesake. However, my dad is in the audience, and he's a Sox fan, so I guess
awesome.
we'll give him the credit.
He and I will talk later then. In fact, there's an ordinance in Spondylisville that prevents anybody from being a Cubs fan, which was a brilliant decision on the part of the village board. So in the first scenario, this is year 1 of Spondylisville. We have a levy of $100,000, and it's split among the homeowners and the businesses. Each homeowner pays $10,000. The 2 businesses pay $30,000 each, and the village collects $100,000 in revenue. But in the second year of our town, there's a recession. And what happens is that all properties are reassessed by the county, and they're reassessed 20% lower than they were, except for homeowner number 1, whose assessment only dropped by 10%, I think because they have a swimming pool in their backyard, and so they didn't get as much of an assessment reduction. So the village still levies $100,000, but because there's a change in how the properties are assessed, homeowner number 1 ends up paying a little bit more in taxes, while everybody else in the village gets a tax reduction. But the bottom line is that the village still only collects $100,000. So what happens is homeowner number 1 calls their trustees and complains that why did you raise my taxes? Well, in reality, the village board, being fiscally prudent, did not raise taxes at all, but because there was a shift in assessments, homeowner number 1 ends up paying more. So now, in the second scenario, we have the same homes in year one paying this, and businesses paying the same amount. But in year two, there's a recession, and one of the businesses closes. So the village still needs $100,000, even though one of the businesses closed, because we still have to pay for core services. So what happens? Well, every homeowner ends up paying more, and the one remaining business ends up paying more. But the village still collects only $100,000. Everybody's upset, and they're calling their trustees, but really the village did not do anything to increase taxes. And then in a third scenario I wanted to show you is year one is the same scenario, but in year two, one of the homeowners in Spondelisville qualifies for the senior freeze exemption. They turn 65 and they meet the income restrictions for the senior freeze. And so what happens is all properties are reassessed, because it's a reassessment year, 10% higher, but except for homeowner number one, who turns 65 and qualifies for the exemption, their assessment as a result of qualifying for it does not change. So the village still levies $100,000, but homeowner number one gets a tax break, and their taxes are reduced to just over $9,000. Everybody else, though, pays more. And that's because there's once again a shift in tax burden. Just because somebody gets a tax break because of an exemption doesn't mean that the overall amount of taxes being paid goes down. It's just paid by different people. And then finally, the fourth scenario is year two is a strong economy. A new business opens, so now we have 3 businesses in town, and the village decides that it's going to levy $130,000, or $30,000 more than it has in the past, to tax the new growth, which is the new business. And so what happens is all of these homeowners pay what they had paid, and businesses 1 and 2 pay what they had paid in the prior year, the same amount. But now that we have business number 3, we're able to collect $130,000 without having any impact to the existing taxpayers. And that's the value of new growth. So what does this prove? Well, a shift in tax burden occurs when properties are reassessed, and that can produce very different results, even though the amount levied is the same. The village can approve a 0% tax increase, but individuals can still end up paying more to the village. And economic development is very important because new businesses, and homes for that matter, reduce the tax burden for everyone. And when we lose a business, it increases the tax burden for everyone. And then finally, the village can tax new growth without having really any impact to existing taxpayers. And where this is going to come into play in Wheeling in a couple of years is when the Crossroads TIF district expires. All of that EAV will become new growth, and the village, in order to capture those dollars without impacting our existing taxpayers, will have to increase our levy pretty significantly to capture those dollars. So the headlines in the newspaper might be, hypothetically, village increases its levy by 10%, but in reality, because of the new growth, the impact to the taxpayers would be 0. So that's something that we're going to have to educate people on at the time in order to be able to do that without a lot of objection.
Michael?
Yeah.
You're short one more scenario. When somebody that works for the village wants a raise, what happens?
Well, that's true. I didn't factor in rising costs, but yeah, that's true. Our costs go up every year, and in a typical scenario that's not a fictitious village, you have to increase your levy to pay for those costs. So that's absolutely true. So again, the assessed value of a home or business can go down, and the amount an individual taxpayer pays can still go up. programs like the senior freeze exemption do not reduce the amount of taxes paid to taxing districts. They just simply shift the tax burden from people who qualify for the exemption to people who don't qualify for the exemption. And unlike a private business, we can only cut so much because we have to continue to pay for core services. I know that's a lot, but that's it. So today we want to answer any questions that you have about the department's budgets, discuss the expanded level sheets. We have an exec session scheduled. We will then adjourn and have lunch. Are there any questions at this point for me? Any other questions?
Oh, one comment, Michael. One of the things that we're seeing with the online sales versus brick and mortar is definitely affecting Wheeling, but it's got to affect other communities like Vernon Hills, Schaumburg, that really have relied on brick and mortar to control their tax levies over the years. I mean, I know some suburbs don't even levy a property tax, and they're going to have to start looking at it.
Right. Yes, I don't know if that'll happen right away, but in the long term, that's definitely going to be an issue because malls, and this is something John Milanofi could speak to better than I can, but malls are struggling. There have been stories written about that. And it used to be that, you hoped and prayed that you would get a mall in your community, and it still is a good thing, but it's going to affect their sales tax revenue going forward. There's just no doubt about it.
And I think it lends to the crystal ball. When we first started talking about town center, 10 years ago, people said, retail, 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 and now we know that that's probably not the way to go, totally for that particular parcel.
Right.
Thank you.
Another point on that, sales tax too. Companies like Walmart are doing these, they have a whole setup now for their local pickup. So you order online, pick up at the store. So how does that sales tax work?
If you pick the product up at the store, we still get the sales tax revenue. But if you order it online and it's shipped to you, then it's use tax. It's use tax. So I'm not very concerned about people ordering their groceries from Walmart and going to the store to pick it up because they're still collecting sales tax on that. I'm more concerned about people ordering groceries and other stuff from Amazon and having it delivered to their home. That's where we really get hurt.
And then what other ways can we encourage our residents to shop local, shop small businesses, and support the local stores? Because in the long run, it helps lower the liability later.
Right. Yeah, I think we can certainly do, and we have done in the past, educational campaigns to try to get people to shop local, and encourage them, through the village newsletter and so forth, talking about this issue and how important it is. Ultimately, it reduces the amount of property taxes you pay if you shop local. The more sales tax revenue we get, the less property tax revenue we need. So we can definitely emphasize that, and I think we have.
And that just really emphasizes the importance of the chamber. I mean, that is exactly the reason they exist, and obviously we have a very close relationship with them. We do the things like the Taste of the Town to try and expose, although those are restaurants that include others outside of Wheeling. Our participation, I think, with the Chamber of Commerce works specifically to that goal.
And also encourage residents from other communities to come and not necessarily shop in our town, but they probably eat in our town more often than others. So, and that helps too.
Yeah, and I think that our Economic Development Department has done a very good job of advertising the community in various publications to try to do just that.
And quite honestly, the fact that we have an Economic Development Department, there are many communities that the role of economic development is simply assigned to someone who has otherwise a full-time job anyway. The village has always recognized the significance of needing an economic development director, prioritizing the idea that we need to go out and solicit business to come to Wheeling, not just wait for businesses to come knocking on our door. And I would certainly argue that we have the best economic development director in the region. So
I was just going to say that.
So I think those are the things. Those are the active steps that we take to try and make sure that people come here, stay here, shop here, eat here.
Michael?
Yep.
Oh,
Just a
go
real
ahead,
quick,
Mary.
I'm sorry, Joe.
Go ahead.
Shouldn't we be optimistic about town center and the sales tax and the food and beverage revenue that anticipates for us?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great project, and it's going to generate a significant amount of revenue for the village, and that's going to help us in the long run. It doesn't solve the problem, but it certainly helps.
That's why it's good to promote that it's happening now,
Right.
so that people do go into all those new brick and mortars that we're building for
Yep.
this destination.
Yep.
Thanks.
Mr. Rito?
Yeah, Michael, do you know, is the levy system, is that like a nationwide thing? Is it something specific to Illinois? It just seems foreign to the concept of taxation. When people think of taxation, they think, I'm in the whatever tax bracket, that's the percentage I get. If I make 100 grand this year, I'm going to pay X amount. If I make 110, I'm going to pay X more. So there's always an understanding that in the future, most likely, you're going to keep contributing more. When you have this, unless you make less money. So when you have something like a market downturn, you know, we still need to levy more money because we're not based on this percentage. And I'm just wondering if that's a nationwide thing or if that's unique to Illinois. And
Well, Illinois is somewhat unique in terms of their implementation of the property tax levy. It works a little bit differently in other states, but we're certainly not unique in terms of property taxes. Property taxes are paid throughout the nation in many different states, and it's a very common thing. I think we're tied with New Jersey for like the highest property taxes in the nation. But in terms of how it's administered, there's nothing more unique than Cook County. Cook County is unique even in Illinois in terms of how they assess property and how often they reassess property. But in terms of property taxes, it's not unusual.
Well, I guess I can ask the question differently. Do you know of any states or anybody else that just does it on a flat level? Like your house is worth $300,000, we're going to tax you at whatever, 4% or 2% of the value.
Yeah.
And then if we reassess your house next year and it's worth $250, you're going to have a lower tax bill. If we reassess it next year and it's $350, you're going to have a higher tax bill. It just seems easier than to talk to our employees and say, just like any normal company, our revenues are down, we can't give you a raise this year. Our revenues are up, we can give you a raise this year. Right. When we have to play this levy game, it just makes everything
right. So you're
worse.
Talking about a flat rate that would
right.
Yeah. I'm not aware of any state. That doesn't mean that there aren't any that do it that way, but I'm not aware of any that do.
Okay. Thanks.
Everybody all set? Everybody ready for a break?
Motion to recess?
Right.
I'd look for a motion to recess.
So moved.
Motion, trustee Kruger, second.
Second.
Trustee Papantos. It is roughly 10:23. How about we get back here 35-ish?
Take it all in favor?
Do we have to vote?
All in favor?
I just wanted to make it clear.
Yep.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all. See you in about 15 minutes or so.
I was giving out big cars for Halloween, and the kids were going down the stairs. I said, it's worth the climb up my stairs. You want it? And they're going, look at what I got.
All right, good morning, everybody. I need a motion to reconvene.
So moved.
Second.
Motion Vogel, second Capantos?
Kruger.
Kruger. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Spondilis?
Thank you. This begins the second half of our budget presentation today. We will begin going department by department of all of our major departments. We'll begin this morning with Public Works. Mr. Janik, if you would. And again, the format here is the department head will talk a little bit about what is going on in their department and then hand it over to the corresponding liaison. Just say a few words. If there are any questions that any other elected official has about the operating budget for the department we're speaking of, this is the opportunity to ask those questions. We'll be happy to answer it. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next department. Again, this is an ongoing process. All of these department budgets have been vetted multiple times, working their way up through the liaison representing the department. So although we are just glancing at the department from a 10,000-foot view, the micro review of each line item has occurred at multiple levels, and that's why we are able to do this in a more streamlined fashion. So with that, Director Janik.
Thank you. Good morning. I know Mike gave you a bunch of news that wasn't so great. My news is not perfect, but actually I do have some good news for everybody. But the Department of Public Works, the people that work for it, particularly my managers and the frontline people, have stepped up in the last couple of years, and as well as thanks to the board for funding our department as well as the new vehicles that we've requested. We've been able to keep up with and maybe improve the level of service over the last few years in the face of the situation that we have relative to our budgets, having to stay within a certain means or reduce. So I just want to point that out. The people that work for me, the managers that are here, have done a lot with their divisions. So our basic numbers for this year, we're reducing our overall budget between both the Public Works and the Water and Sewer funds by approximately 4%, maybe 3.9% on an overall basis. That's about $12 million just from our two budgets, and then we have the capital projects, which is another $8 to $9 million. So we have reduced it slightly. Most of those reductions don't really see them from the budget in terms of projects or, say, salaries, but our increases have been salaries, health insurance, software upgrade for sewer televising. The decreases in our budget have been through general liability, parkway work such as trees, reduction in salt purchases and chemicals, overtime and consulting. Now, our department, everybody knows, but we have 6 divisions. Administration, building services, capital projects and engineering, fleet services, streets and forestry, and utility. And generally speaking, what that means is that we take care of all the streets, sidewalks, water main distribution system, sanitary sewer and storm systems, municipal facilities, rail stations, and then our fleet as well as everybody else's fleet. What we've tried to do the last couple of years, and I appreciate the patience. I've been in this new job, but we tried to increase the efficiency of our existing infrastructure system, select improvements through the CIP and other projects that have high value results to the municipality, and then manage our projects to stretch the budget dollars. So here's some other numbers, actually some our cost-effective strategies and efficiencies that we've been trying to, and we have been implementing. Through contracting, we've increased the number of collaborative bidding organizations that we've joined, so that when we do purchase vehicles or other items, we can, we don't just go through our own public bidding process. We use like a national or a regional collaborative bidding group to reduce our costs. We're members of we use probably 5 different collaborative bidding groups right now. Relative to our in-house public bid contracts, what we've done recently is we've done multi-year contracts instead of year to year. That helps us with our budgeting, but also gets us better prices. And we don't need to spend as much time bidding every single year. Operational improvements have been three major areas. One is a modified snow and ice operations. We've improved technology through some purchases for our trucks, not only the trucks themselves, but with our salting technology, product application procedures, and then the reassessment of our snow and ice procedures. Basically, what I'm saying is that we've changed our procedures. We've used more liquid chemicals than the rock salt, which has enabled us to get ahead of some of the snow and ice situations that we've had the last few years. This has reduced our application amount of salt by about 40%. It's less wear and tear on the trucks. It's lowered some of our personnel costs, but it also is in keeping with reduction of environmental negative impacts to both the stormwater system as well as where this water goes. We've outsourced certain maintenance operations the last few years, particularly with landscape services and the holiday light installation and removal. Between both those programs, we've increased the amount of hours that our personnel can use doing work within the municipality, but it's also done a structural change relative to savings per year. Between those two, we probably save each year, it's over $100,000 year over year by switching that and then having our personnel do more work on the streets, do more work, we're cleaning pipes, cleaning the streets, that sort of thing. And the third one would be obtaining maximum capacity from our existing and recent infrastructure systems. We've chosen projects to maximize the impacts, the positive impacts to the municipality, such as Jackson Drive. Not only doing the new pumping station at the south end of Jackson, but also that pumping station in connection with the other pumping station at the basin, Buffalo Grove Basin at the north end. New piping we put in, new stormwater piping we put in, both at North Wheeling Road as well as in the Strong Street area. 2 very large diameter pipes we put in, which have reduced greatly issues with localized flooding. It's not to say we don't still have localized flooding, which we're working on, but we are obtaining close to maximum capacity on our systems. Part of which is the reason for that is the vehicles and the machinery that the board has allowed us to purchase in recent years. Here's some numbers that are not my budget numbers, but these are just numbers relative to personnel and the services that have changed in the last 2 to 3 years. Road reconstruction and resurfacing. I will have a presentation for you in a couple weeks for the CIP, but just as a general number, we've increased our resurfacing and reconstruction from around 5,000 feet a year, about a mile, to 2 miles a year. Now this year, because you allowed me to spend additional monies from next year, we actually did 29,000 linear feet of roadway, which, as you know, driving around your neighborhoods, and I know a lot of you live in the neighborhoods that we've done, we've drastically increased the amount of roadways that we've improved. The increased tree and stump removal by village personnel, we've gone from 51 to 127, sort of an average, from 2 or 3 years ago till today. Roadway pothole filling has risen from 1,500 to 1,750. Curb installation removal and replacement by our personnel has gone from about 400 linear feet to 700. This is a drastic reduction in cost to us, where we would have to have an outside contractor do it. We have our own personnel doing it now. And this goes back to those, the landscape services contract as well as the holiday light contract, where our people are now able to do more work for us on core services. Increased work order efficiency relative to building maintenance. Keeping up with it now, getting ahead of projects, and doing more projects that maybe we wouldn't have gotten done. An important one relative to our piping systems, and then maybe you saw the Chicago Tribune article about water usage the other day. Our water loss is down to below 8% now. We were at 12. Now this 8% means that we are doing a lot of work relative to our valves, relative to our new water mains that's going in, and just keeping up with leaks in our community. Reducing this water loss saves money for the municipality from our purchasing, as well as reduces it to charging our residents. But it also just means that our systems are working a lot better than they were. Leak detection has gone up from 31,000 linear feet to 100,000 linear feet. That's a machinery that we have, technology that we put down our water pipes to check for leaks. Water main breaks have been reduced from around 40 a year to 15 a year. You can imagine the difference in overtime, personnel, as well as just leakage, water leakage from that. And then one thing that our staff has done, particularly this is engineering, but it has to do with everybody, is that we've spent more of our budget per year than we used to, which means more projects getting done. We used to spend around 67 to 70% of our budgeted money for projects a year. Now we're over 90%, which just means we're taking on more work and getting it done every single year, which then reflects in how much work is being done in the community and upgrading our systems. So I could go through the budget and tell you where the savings were, but I thought maybe those numbers would be more important for you to hear than me going through the budget.
Trustee Vogel is your liaison?
Yes.
Trustee Vogel.
Thanks, Mark. I'd like to echo Mark's opening comments. Thank all of his staff. As he stated, it's not all good news going forward, and it's been a tough year, but they've really given 100% and dedicated themselves to making their shop more efficient, and we appreciate that. If you look at Mark's budget, it is very lean. There's very little waste in it at all, if any. And the increases are more contractual and required, salaries and insurance and things like that, employee benefits. But what he was able to do is recategorize some of those expenses. But he mentioned using outside services to do some of the work, and using our staff to do the inside work that would otherwise be more expensive. So I know he'll continue that as he goes forward, and I think the last 2 years has demonstrated Mark's ability to find all the efficiencies and work with what he has, and so we really appreciate that. So again, thank you, Mark.
If there are any questions, Trustee Lang?
Is there any, I know you do some of this, and some communities borrow equipment from each other or co-own equipment. Is there any other efficiencies you can find with picking Arlington Heights or Buffalo Grove and saying, can we go in on a piece of equipment together that we need but don't use on a daily basis? I know you do some of that.
We actually do. Last year, for instance, we did on Jackson Drive. We had there was a large area that we were going to take on to pave ourselves. It was before the actual paving of the road got done. There were some spots we were concerned about as on an underlying basis, and we actually teamed up with Arlington Heights to use their paving box to pave. And actually, they gave us some of their personnel as well to do that. Right now, we've considered that. But right now, with the personnel that we have, we probably don't have enough people to warrant buying a piece of equipment such as a paving box to get more paving done on a year's basis, for instance. So we have considered some items of equipment to share like that, but relative to, say, a sewer vac truck or some other piece of equipment like that, we use it so much that we do lend them out. If there's a problem with another community, we will do that. But relative to buying a piece and sharing it with them, it'd be relatively tough to do.
We've actually looked into that, and Mark's point is absolutely valid, that we try to not have too much specialty equipment that isn't used on a regular basis. But when we've looked at that, it becomes a challenge a little bit. Who gets the depreciation? Who gets the, how you split the actual use of it? But it is something we continually look at where the opportunity arises, and something we have looked at in the past.
Thank you.
Trustee Papantos.
Thank you. We're now contracting out for the holiday lights to be put up. Is that done? And are we ready for the lighting of the lights on the 19th?
Yeah, that was done approximately about 3 weeks ago. And we are currently, the lights on the trees are ready. The ground-mounted lighting, let's call it the ground-mounted pieces, were started to be put up this year. You'll see, or this week, you'll see the tree at the northwest corner was put up out in front of Walgreens. And during the next week, you'll see probably virtually all the pieces.
Do we have an
place.
estimate on the number of man-hours we've saved by contracting that out?
I have that number someplace because we did ask the contractor to give us a number for them to install everything. I can get that for you. It's a substantial amount of money.
I realize that, and that's why I brought it up, that even though this does cost us a lot of money, it has freed up our personnel greatly.
That project, for instance, was taken over by building services. They were the ones that used to be putting up the holiday lights, which was tough for us to do because we had to pull people off all the time. It would take a long time. Now they're put up very quickly, but they took over that project. They're the ones that install those, for the most part, those lights.
And have we reduced seasonal help because of our outside contracts with
We have.
landscaping?
We reduced seasonal help by about 50%.
What's the next project due for the storm water utility? I know we've worked on Wheeling Road and the drainage there. What's the next major project?
We have one that we're going to be bidding out. We were going to be bidding out this fall, but the Corps of Engineers took so long in approving some of our project that we're going to do it in the spring. Then that's the 66-inch storm sewer that's being put in or adjacent to and then extending west from South Wheeling Road near where Reynolds Aluminum is, the low spot there. It's going to drain the water from that area to Echo Lake. That's approximately, say, $850,000. We do have another project that we've been looking at just recently. It's not a huge project, but we think it's going to have a lot of impact, and that's a repiping and a reflowing of water in the Bernice and Wayne at the intersection at Bernice and Wayne.
That's East Dunhurst?
That's correct. Those are two that we're looking at right now. And while that's going on, we are also doing the remapping project with Seabell, the engineering contractor. That's going along well. We don't have the ultimate decision on that yet, but that's the remapping is a change in where the floodplain is in the village, and we're hoping to get out. We're hoping to transfer at least 600 units out of the floodplain and then reduce the cost of flood insurance for those residents.
Are those mainly residential or?
It's mostly residential, that's correct.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Mark, thank you very much. Everyone from Public Works, thank you very much. Did you have a question?
I was just curious. Should a list of possible projects to the engineers relative to the study from
Human Services Director Huisar. As you know, the village runs a Human Services department split into two sections. This is actually a very exciting year for the department. I won't steal Director Huisar's thunder, but this is a very good thing and another example of the village moving forward and finding better ways to serve its residents. Director Huisar.
Good morning. As Manager Svandiela said, this has been a very interesting year, and it will continue to be interesting going into the next year. One of the things that we're doing is transitioning the Wheeling Pavilion Senior Center programming to the Wheeling Park District Community Recreation Center. This will improve access to more services and to more seniors, so we're really looking forward to that. As a result of vacating the senior center property, all of our social services, which is our other division, will be located in one place. They'll be located at the police department, and all of our services will remain available. They'll just all be in the same place, which makes things a little bit easier for supervision-wise as well. Our lunch program, the Lunch at Pavilion program, will be moving during the construction at the Community Recreation Center. They will be moving to the St. Joseph the Worker Social Hall, which we're looking forward to as well. And one of the things that we've been able to do in preparation for 2019, when we will be able to include all of our programming, senior programming at the Community Recreation Center, is we were able to get a grant from Age Options to be able to buy some of the needed equipment. We've bought it already. We'll be saving it until 2019, but that will save us from having to pay for that in a couple of years. So that was good. One of the things that that also happened this year was the closure of the Wheeling Food Pantry. While many people have seen this as a negative, it's actually a success story. The pantry opened in 2011 and was serving about 300 or more families per month with food. The pantry closed in August of this year, and the average was 40 families per month that we were serving, which means that many families were in a much better place, and those families that were still in need of food through the pantry have been referred out and connected with other services in the community. Although the pantry has closed, the Wheeling Rotary Grant Fund continues to provide access to funds in an emergency way for families if that is a need, so we are still able to do that. But that was actually a success. As social services or as social workers, it is our job to kind of put ourselves out of business. Most times that doesn't happen. In this situation, it actually did. Also during this past year, staff have been spending a great deal of time, not as much time at all as the Community Development Department, but in conjunction with them with the Fox Point Transition and Relocation Program. We've been working with the families, providing interpretation, providing information, and getting the message out to them, particularly during the flood in July, but we continue to support these families as they move forward. One of the things that we are doing with the social service program to be able to access more, provide more services to more families without adding staff is that our social service division has opened up our intern program so that we no longer just follow a school year calendar, but that we are able to take interns all year long. Many of the universities and graduate schools have kind of a rolling enrollment, and we're now able to take interns. So I have an intern that started on the traditional internship program in August, and I will have another one starting next week, and we will continue so that we're able to not have a downtime, but we will always have interns, which truly helps us continue to serve families at the same level. And the last thing that I would say when we talk about what our program is doing, we truly try to work with all departments, and one of the changes that has taken place through the fire department is also, we are also working with, and that would be with the invalid assists. We're working together with the fire department to try to prevent continued excessive calls by some of the families or some of the older people or disabled people who have been using the fire department for lift service. We are able to meet with them, try to get them services, and hopefully prevent that and help them stay safe as well as save us all in that situation. So my liaison is Trustee Brady, and I'll turn that over to you.
Well, Sherry, I can honestly say it's been a great pleasure working with you, and I'm looking forward to even more. You know, the only downside about you is you're a Packer fan. Other than that,
Look out.
ladies and gentlemen, she's never down. Things could be looking the worst, and she's always got an up attitude about everything she does. You look at social services. She works with police department, aiding crime victims, helping people that have had disasters, and helping those go through losses. She's there to help them personally and with her staff, and then also with the fire department. A person had a loss of her house burned. She was there physically helping these people through getting set up with the insurance companies, finding a place to live. Look at what she's done over here at Fox Point. She's had helped them people find a place to live, making their transition a little bit easier. To somebody, when it comes to core services, I don't think there's a person who touches each one of our citizens more than Sherry when it comes to true help, because she's there for them. She advises them. She's got the tools that they need to survive through whatever their problems are, And then when it comes to the seniors, I don't know how she juggles all this stuff. Added responsibilities of the coordination of the transition from the senior center to where it's at to the park district, the congregate dining. All of this has got to be done. She does it with a few staff. You look at her total budget for these two departments, $747,000. It's peanuts for what she really does. And I think we're very, very, very lucky to have her. Good job, Sherry. Keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any questions for the department? Thank you both.
I would be remiss if I didn't say that. Thank you so much for your lovely words, but I do not do this alone. I have a wonderful staff, and we all work very hard. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Next up, we have the fire department, Chief McIsaac, and his liaison is Trustee Mary Kruger.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. It's been quite a year for the fire department. We've gone through some personnel changes, and I obviously also want to point out my key staff. This is who runs the fire department. My Deputy Chief, Mike McGreal, and Eileen Breyer, our management analyst. Three of us are who hold the department together on a day-to-day and week-to-week basis. And I do want to express my thanks to them that I couldn't accomplish half the things I do without them. Our big accomplishments this year that I just want to highlight for you is obviously the elephant in the room. You can't escape ISO. Puts us in the top 3.5% of fire departments in the United States. That accomplishment was a team effort through obviously a lot of hard work on people in the department. It was years in the making. And I also would be remiss if I didn't mention that it would not have been possible without assistance from the dispatch centers, both Wheeling PD and Red Center, and the Public Works Department and the Water Department. They're all part of the team that put that all together. We've expanded a lot of our joint training in the past year. We're doing a lot of training with our immediately surrounding communities. We've upped our training with Prospect Heights and are working with them more closely. You can't escape the fact that we are already in a joint dispatching center with 14 other fire departments. And an interesting note that we have, in October, implemented a brand new computer-aided dispatch system, state of the art. We're going through some startup issues and bugs, but when it's all done, it's going to be quite phenomenal, and it's actually already starting to have benefits to the community. As a result of technology that has finally caught up with the business. We have moved to a more real-time closest response unit. Through computer technology, it is actually analyzing where the call is in relationship to the closest vehicles. Where that really pays off is when vehicles are on the street, they're coming back from the hospital or other things. It means that we can actually dispatch vehicles to the scene versus maybe one that's sitting in a station and there would be a 1 minute turnout time differential. So we do anticipate that this will have a really, really good impact on us. It does mean that we are working in that same relationship with our neighbors. There are going to be times when our neighbors are actually closer to us, same type of scenario. So you might actually see us responding into some of our neighboring communities occasionally a little more, and vice versa, our neighbors coming into our community a little bit more. We put a new ambulance in service this year. It just arrived. We're in the process of finalizing that. That was a joint project with our Fleet Services Division and Public Works. The Fire Prevention Bureau is working feverishly with their 1.5 personnel, as you can imagine, not only trying to maintain the safety of our community, but also to keep up with the rapid construction going on in our community, and they're doing an excellent job. We've completed an entry-level testing process for new firefighter paramedics, and we are right now in the midst of providing a lieutenant promotional process within the department. We have implemented an online survey. Some of you may remember we used to do the little yellow service cards when you had ambulance calls and things like that in the community. We now hand you out a little business card with a web link, and it takes you right to an online web survey. Therefore, also reducing some of our survey costs. Eileen has been working very closely with Brian Smith and the finance department and has made great improvements in streamlining the payroll processing system and increasing some efficiencies there. And as you may remember, we recently were before the board where we changed over as of November 1st to Andre's medical billing, which will actually bring some additional revenue just in the method of which we're processing in the contract that was negotiated with them. And as has been alluded to in Michael's presentation a little bit, we did a complete analysis this year of the types of calls we responded on. We've looked at it, and on December 1st, we are making some operational changes to basically free up personnel to more directly address the core services that are needed in the community, such as ambulance calls and fire calls, and taking them away from what I would call miscellaneous service calls. Of those are 400 elevator calls a year. The letters are out. All the occupancies have already been notified, and as of December 1st, we will cease responding on elevator calls where there is no voice, no noise in response. We are also adapting a change involving trouble alarms. Trouble alarms are a situation where the fire alarm sends a signal that says something's not right. Usually it's an electrical problem or it's a communication problem, in many cases brought on by the phone company. And as a result of efforts from staff, we have collected telephone numbers and contact numbers for all of these alarms in the community, 3 tiers deep, and Red Center will be contacting those contacts to let them deal with their own internal problems without sending a very expensive fire crew and piece of equipment out to check it out. And finally, the next thing that's coming up and will be shortly before you in the spring is a joint project with our community development department, where we will be working on adopting the next series of new building and fire codes for the community. And obviously, looking to the future, there's been changes in methods and materials, and obviously in looking at the finances and trying to keep expenses lower, we are looking always for ways of building safety into the buildings so that we can avoid having to add additional personnel and equipment to meet growing demands in the community. The budget that's before you today is a status quo budget. It's tight, it's lean, it's a 1.1% budgetary increase. A lot of that is as a result of completion of some projects, better purchasing, as alluded by Public Works Director Janik. We too are also doing a lot of purchasing as a result of group purchasing programs and things of that nature. My liaison is Trustee Mary Kruger. She and I have met several times over the year and talked about various aspects of the department, and I would like to defer to her if she has anything to add.
Thank you, Chief McIsaac. Yeah, it's no secret that fire department doesn't need my help to operate. But what I have witnessed over the last year, and really almost my third year being your liaison, is that as Michael alluded earlier, structural changes that are necessary to be done when you can't buy bodies. And as much as I would always like to say boots on the ground is always something that you want to do in your public safety area, when it's not available or it's not feasible to do, then structural operational changes must happen. And you guys have done a great job with the invalid assists and what you're coming before us with. I am intrigued by also serving on the Red Center board with you and with Mike, because that CAD system improvement is something that I think will revolutionize the way Red is seen as a marketable agency, and perhaps then 14-member communities turns to 16 or 18 or more. And getting more member communities reduces the amount that we in Wheeling would pay, because it's all based on call volume. And since our call volume, as you said, is going down because of structural and operational improvements, we're absolutely working in the right direction. We are lean, we are not so mean, but the fire department has a great reputation, and that this community should be very grateful for that ISO rating. It's something to be very proud of, and it's a great pleasure working with you and all the staff.
Thank you very much.
Any questions specific to the fire department budget?
Just one comment. Once again, congratulations on the ISO rating. We are ASO 2, correct?
Correct.
How many ones are out there and who has a 1?
I don't have that information in front of you, but it's a very, very, very small number. In our immediate area, the ones that come to mind is Arlington Heights and Skokie.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anything else?
Thank you very much for
Chief
your time.
McIsaac. Because, we felt that Michael has had enough of a break, thought we'd bring him back up here to discuss the finance department, and his liaison is Trustee Papantos.
Right. And I'm going to make this short because I'm sure everybody's tired of hearing me speak. So we are trying to achieve in the finance department a number of greater efficiencies that help not only the residents of Wheeling, first and foremost, but also our other customers, which are our internal customers, the other departments. And so towards that end, we recently implemented an ACH vendor payment program so that we now have 50% of the payments that we make to vendors are now done electronically, as opposed to mailing a physical check to them, which the vendors like because they get their money faster. We like because it saves us time in stuffing envelopes and that kind of thing, and also cuts down on the opportunity for check fraud, which has always been an issue regardless of what organization you work for. Not internal fraud, but external fraud, I should say. And then the other thing that we're in the process of trying to implement is our AquaHawk water meter software system. And if you'll recall, a few years ago when we implemented our new water meter program, we purchased this software that allows us to track water usage. And so when you take a shower, we know about it. And we've used that information.
Not in a creepy way.
No. Thanks for the clarification.
But we're able to monitor water usage for leaks, really. So we've had a number of situations over the years where we've been aware of someone having a leak. We've been able to notify that resident or that business that we suspect they have a leak, and they have been able to address it before they end up with a really high bill. When I first started working here, we were billing every 2 months like we are now, but we would not know if somebody had a leak until we did a reading, which would be sometimes 2 months later. And then residents would get these bills that were like $1,500, $2,000 because they had this, and they would be naturally really upset. And so we have pretty much eliminated that situation by being proactive in contacting people. So anyway, the AquaHawk software would allow people to monitor their own water usage. They'd be able to log on the internet and track their usage and determine why they're using more water than they think they're using and when they're using it and whether their teenagers are taking too long of a shower and that kind of stuff. So anyway, you get the idea. And then finally, we're looking at implementing a new system that would allow people to pay just about any bill that's generated by the village online. We have a number of ways to pay bills online now, but they're really different systems, and this would coordinate and consolidate so that you could go to one place and pay for a parking ticket or pay for a water bill. Along with that would come electronic water billing for those who would like to sign up for it. So instead of having to receive a paper copy of the bill in the mail, you could receive a bill sent to your email address. And it would allow some of the other departments who do not currently accept online payments to do so. It would also cut down on the amount of staff time that we spend on processing, in particular, water bills, because there are condo associations that may have 200 separate water bills right now that we have to then process. They'd be able to pay all of them at the same time, and we'd be able to process them much more easily. So we're looking forward to trying to implement that in the next year. And we're also working currently with our police pension fund to possibly send out a request for proposals for investment managers to make sure that we are getting the best investment returns that we can on our pension fund investments. It's been a while since the police pension fund looked at a new manager. It may end up that we decide the manager we're using is the best manager, but we want to make sure that we're covering all our bases. And then as far as our budget is concerned, it's basically a status quo budget. It's down $10,000 from the prior year. 90% of our budget is staffing. We don't have equipment to speak of, and so it's people. We have a new payroll coordinator who just took over for Nancy Hoppy, who retired after many years, 32 years. And her name is Dawn Ah, and she comes from Carpentersville, and she's doing a great job. And that's about it. I'll be happy to answer any questions, unless you want to say. My liaison is Mary Papantos, so.
Because I haven't talked enough today. Michael, Brian, Mike, Angela, thank you so much. I think most people do realize it, but budget time is a crunch that doesn't happen this week. You've been working on this for months, and I know that. And to put this book together is 99% of your work. I realize all the departments, do their own, but you're the one giving them the numbers, where they stand, providing them with the information that you need, and it is so appreciated. You have, for years, that either up here or sitting in the audience, and I've listened to this, Michael, you've predicted right on every year where we're going to be, and we need that information to be able to go forward and decide how we're going to spend that tax levy, what we need. Certain services are a given, but what else can we do and where can we go? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The liaison for the Finance Department always has an extra challenge for them, as that responsibility really falls not just for the department, but also working with the village president, looking at the village's finances as a whole. So thank you for your time in looking at the bigger picture as well as just the department. Well done. Thank you. Next up, Police Department, Chief Dunn. And your liaison is Trustee Lang.
Yes, I've met him.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you, President Horker and trustees, for your continued support of the Wheeling Police Department. You continually scrutinize how dollars are parsed out to the village, and you support the mission of the police department and supply us with everything we need to accomplish our mission. So for that, I thank you. Trustee Lang, thank you for your support and the numerous conversations and meetings. Nothing really happens in the police department without you being made aware of it. Any structural changes or anything, you bring it back to the board, and we interact that way, and I appreciate your time. Village Manager Svandilis, thank you for the direction and leadership over the past year. There's been many distractions to the village and the board, but you've never taken your eye off the ball in providing the leadership. I appreciate that. Deputy Chief Wolf prepared the lion's share of the budget. Thank you for that. If any has specific questions of the budget, we'll drag him up here to answer those questions. Our 911 Director, Rick Elliott Rogers, completed our largest project this year, and that was our StarCom 21 radio communication system. We're now in the 21st century. It's digital. It's not analog. It works great, and we're cutting edge now when it comes to communications. This is the first year we did our own police officer entry exam. We're not part of a consortium, so we were able to run our own test and bring candidates to the Village of Wheeling who want to work for the Village of Wheeling. They weren't applying for 7 other departments, just Wheeling. We've identified 4 candidates who will be going to the academy in January. As everybody was aware, you're present in the board room here a month ago. We had many promotions and people moving on to other parts of their careers after spending much time with the Village of Wheeling and having great success here, and we wish them well, and they've done well where they're going. We made a large change this year in how we did the day-to-day operation of dealing with tickets and citations. We've added a long list of violations to our own adjudication system. That's handled here within the Village of Wheeling. With Cook County and their budgets and taking more and more of the dollars away from Wheeling and decriminalizing a lot of issues and refusing to prosecute, we've been able to capture some of those issues and make them ordinance issues. So our officers, under the adjudication, they're able to issue electronic citations here in Wheeling, and there's numerous benefits to that. Not only the dollars stay in Wheeling, we're not policing for dollars, but we are still engaged in policing, which is number one. But our officers spend less time in Cook County courts. They're still here in the Village of Wheeling if they're working, less overtime. And the benefit to the residents and to the offenders is that they can pay their fines online, they can drop the money off here, and if they want to contest it, they can come here to this boardroom, to this room, and contest it. So it's a system that we're expanding, and it continues to grow, and we're enjoying some great success from that. We've transitioned, we continue to do more with less, but not less, in the respect of we're joining more and more task forces and joining more and more with our neighbors. As the board alluded to earlier, can we buy equipment and share equipment with other communities? One thing we can do is we can pool our resources. We have a lot of talented police officers in Wheeling, as do other towns. And so when we pool these specialties into task forces, it's a force multiplier. We've recently joined a narcotics task force that puts us in league with over 8 of our surrounding communities and 3 other counties in the Illinois State Police. That's called the North Central Narcotics Task Force. We continue to staff for the ordinary, but we plan for the extraordinary. And the way we do that is, again, partnering with our neighbors and those around us. We have some amount of officers on the street at any given time, but should a major event happen, we have the resources to draw the manpower and the equipment and the leadership we need to deal with any issue that may arise. And with that, if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Trustee Lang?
Well, I'd like to, I've been with the department as liaison for a few years and really learned a lot about the training that our officers go through, and very impressed. And I know some of you have been on some of the training in the weapons range and so on. That interesting to know how well trained our officers are in case they ever needed it. And fortunately, having that good training also is better discretion for the officers needing that actual use of weapons and so on. Definitely have greater efficiency, all the departments, greater efficiency doing more with less people, but reallocating those sources, and this goes for village-wide. I see everyone's reallocating their sources better to cover areas that could be lacking because of tight budgets. Also, the great efficiency with these regional programs is amazing, too. I was made aware of that this year, that we're doing more of that, and those are great. Anytime we can reach out with our neighboring communities and use some of their assistance when needed is tremendous for us. Overtime is managed pretty well as well. We have, one of our sergeants also works in the radio room for overtime, and to me, that's tremendous cross-training. He knows how the radio room works better. He is able to bring his expertise as an officer into the radio room, and the communication is much better for those, for each other at that point. They're working much better together. So all in all, we're very fortunate. We have a great police department. All our departments are great, but since I'm concentrating on police, I'm tip my hat to you.
Thank you. And you know, the efficiencies are across the board, not only within the northwest suburbs, but within the village itself and with the other department heads. You know, with Chuck taking care of the vehicles, it's one less thing I have to think about with the emissions issues and the CO2. You know, he's already ahead of it and dealing with those issues. And as you mentioned, the efficiencies of, if we have a shortage in the radio room, the officers, it's great. We have 5 officers willing to work in there, and their overtime rate when they work in that is not as a police officer, it is a radio operator. So again, it's great cooperation with the unions. They recognize it's a different job that they have a skill set for, but they work for the overtime rate of the radio operators, not for a police officer. So again, it just shows their willingness to recognize the difference of the functions.
This is a good opportunity just to reinforce that point. Director Janik said it, and it's across the board. But, you know, there's always an analysis that goes into this process, obviously. But specific to overtime in dispatch or contracting out certain functions in public works, sometimes it's a challenge to look at, in particular, look at an overtime of $40,000 in dispatch versus hiring another body for salary and benefits. And that's why this liaison program works, because it gives us the opportunity to discuss that in detail with you at the root level of the budget discussion. Same with the example that Director Janik gave. You know, you look line item and it says, you know, $90,000 to install holiday lights, and that seems, well, that's crazy. Why wouldn't you cut that out of the budget? The answer, I believe, Trustee Papantos asked the question, when we were bringing that contract on, and I'm sorry to steal your time here, the analysis was 3 people for 3 months. That's the value of outsourcing. So while there's a cost associated with some of these decisions, there's value that, well, with all these decisions, but there's value that exceeds that expenditure. In the case of dispatch, $40,000 in overtime, you look at that overtime number and you know, sometimes you think, wow, this is a huge overtime number. Well, $40,000 is better than $110,000, so it makes sense. $90,000 for holiday lights is better than, assuming we want to continue the service, is better than having to hire additional personnel to do it. So these are the things, when we talk about efficiencies, we talk about it with that blanket statement, but these are some great examples of the specifics of how we look at everything we do and try and figure out what makes the most sense, whether we insource, outsource, contract out, whatever it is. This is all part of what we do in every department. It was just an opportunity to reinforce that point since you brought up dispatch, so thank you.
And to add to that, plus employment costs, plus pension costs,
absolutely,
and so on, you're avoiding all that as
absolutely,
well.
Absolutely. Any other questions for police?
I just, one comment. I want to send kudos to all the community service that comes out of the police department as far as the Citizen Police Academy. I believe this year was the first year that it was in Spanish,
yes,
to reach out, neighborhood watch programs, the National Night Out. You know, our police are present and they're working with school children and adults and always there, and not just as the person who's pulling you over and writing that ticket, which is great.
Thank you for acknowledging that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry.
Jamie, how many employees does the dispatch
20 total. In last year's budget, we had 20 dispatchers. This year, we have 19, and that's the overtime we're alluding to. Instead of hiring an additional person, when those times come up, we're hiring back for overtime.
Because that was one of the points I had. I'm looking at this, and on the overtime line, you've got 30% of your total budget for labor in the dispatch is overtime.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of money. But if that's all the sergeants, is that part of their salary or all of their salary? Overtime?
No, that overtime would be whatever individual worked it, whether it would be from the police side of things or the dispatch side of things. The dispatch center is staffed to bare bones, to a zero level, meaning that whenever the reason you see the overtime for that department being high in general is because when anybody takes any benefit time, be it a sick day, vacation time, or training, that's a must hire back situation.
Okay.
So to avoid that, we would really have to staff it with 26 or 27 people. Hence, that budget would be, the personnel would be about $700,000 to $800,000 more. So again, doing the analytics of it, it's easy. It makes more sense to spend $200,000-300,000 in overtime rather than $700,000 of annual ongoing costs, which also have the pension ramifications and other issues.
So that's where our regular guys go in there and help out when needed.
Yes, dispatchers have first choice at it, but when they don't want it, then it falls back. There's 5 officers who have been trained to work dispatch. In fact, 2 of them were dispatchers either in Wheeling or somewhere else before they were police officers. So they have the skill set that they can come in to work the radio room. And they can work, the room, they can work either the Wheeling channel or the Des Plaines channel. They've been trained to that level.
Makes more sense. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Chief. Next up, Community Development, Director Jennings, and his liaison is Trustee Vito.
Thank you very much. I think since I'm wrapping things up here, and I've had a chance to listen to the other departments before me, I think community development may see more so than the other departments the relationship between all of the different departments, the reliance that we all have on each other. There's a slide that illustrated the total number of employees that we've been reduced by over the last few years, and I think the reason that works is that all of our departments do lean on each other a great deal and communicate well with each other. We use, in addition to everybody you saw here, we use the village attorneys, IT, economic development, the staff and the administration as well. So I want to start with that. It is a full organizational effort. Like I said, CD probably sees more of that than most of the other departments do. Our plan for 2018 is as I've discussed with Trustee Vito, is to continue doing a lot of what we've been doing in the past, which is continue to find efficient ways to do what we do, which means use the hours that we have better to keep providing the same services with better methods. We have a relatively small budget outside of our personnel. It's about 9% of our budget is non-personnel, and Tammy Warkish helps us manage that 9% of our budget very well, and she put this together for us. We have 4 divisions. We have a health and property maintenance division that handles code enforcement. We have a building division. We have a clerical permit desk division, and then planning and zoning, which handles our land use review. We have, over the last year, done, I think, a very good job of adjusting our inspection programs to make sure that we're using our hours effectively. We're focusing our resources where they need to be focused to provide the highest level of service with the least amount of staff time. The division heads that we've implemented over the last year have been really instrumental in doing that. It provides a faster feedback loop for me. We're able to adjust the way that we handle each division's functions very rapidly because there's somebody inside the division who's responsible for the day-to-day operation of the division. As I said, we try to use our staff hours the best that we can. Some of that relates to providing better information to the public so we don't have to spend our time helping the public find that information. That means we work with IT and GIS to provide good information on the website so that we're open at all hours. We have work to make our permitting process more digital. We're going to continue to do that next year as well. We have been accelerating the process of digitizing our archive of building permits. We had this just a few weeks ago. We had a ordinance in front of you to allow us to very rapidly finish off the scanning process for that. We have, over the last year, brought to you several changes to our programs and procedures to help us decrease the burden to the public and also, as a bonus, decrease our staff hours associated with some of the procedures we found to be minimally effective. That would be things like the background checks for business licenses, as well as our bond requirement for permits. We have, over the last year, created a new framework for the backflow prevention program to help us set our long-term goals and in turn set annual goals. We have improved our cross-training for our inspectors so that our inspectors, for example, in the building permit division, can assist the property maintenance folks by handling inspections while they're out and not having to call a different inspector over and handle a property maintenance inspection for them. All of this has been done while handling a pretty large turnover in our staff. We've been pretty stable for years. We had a turnover about a quarter of our staff in the last year. As you can imagine, it's difficult, it's time consuming to train people and keep providing the day-to-day services that the community has come to expect out of this department. We have also, through the year, managed some major projects, some of the things discussed today. The Fox Point relocation program we could not do without every department here. We have literally used the police, fire department, economic development, the attorneys, Sherry, of course, and human services. We have used every single department. Public Works is out there helping us. The police help us open the gate as needed. So everybody has really pitched in. It's been a group effort. The finance department is working extremely closely with us. We absolutely could not do it without them. The land use review for the years included the Wheeling Town Center, the Uptown 500 project, the Chaddock Industrial Center, the speculative building on Northgate, the Wolf Crossing development. So our planning and zoning division has been very busy with those. Our building permit folks have been overseeing, as you can see, some very large construction projects. So this is all credit to our staff, I think, to handle the challenges that I've given to them to do more with the hours that you have while still maintaining, come up with ideas, you know what I mean, come up with ideas to do a better job. It's very difficult to implement changes in procedures while everything keeps coming in. The building permit desk is a lot like the post office. It's hard to stop and figure out how to change delivery of the mail while you're still delivering the mail. With that, I think I would hand it over to Trustee Vito.
Yeah, Andrew and I probably just meet once a year, to be honest. I don't know if that's the spirit of the liaison program, but I think he likes it and I like it, so we're going to keep it that way. I think he does a good job, and that's why I don't hound him and get on his back. So I don't really have anything to add. I'll just be talking superfluously if I did. So,
Any questions in the CD budget? Andrew, thank you. That is the end of our department presentations. Director Malanofi is going to make some comments about ED when we talk about one of the one of our decisions to make at the end of the day. I can answer any questions on any of the other budgets. There are a number of funds. If anyone has any questions, they're not large enough to require a presentation, but certainly can answer any other questions. If not, I do want to say it's probably in my job description to cheer on staff, but I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. I say that we have the best staff in the northwest suburbs. I mean it sincerely. It is a difficult situation that we are working through, but it is only through the efforts of this staff that morale has stayed up, that they continue to bring in new ideas to change the way we function without changing the impact negatively to the residents and to the businesses of this community. And while that may be part of the job, I think that we our staff go the extra mile, absolutely, because they care about this community. You see that in the number of years after everyone's name. This is a well-tenured staff. In fact, I think with very few exceptions, do we ever see anyone leave the Village of Wheeling through anything other than retirement. And I think that speaks volumes to the organization itself, and that goes all the way to the top, to the people sitting at this dais. So again, I want to extend my appreciation, my congratulations again for another well put together draft budget and presentation, and beyond that, the day-to-day work that goes into making sure that all of this is executed the way it's supposed to. So with that, the last thing before executive session, bring Michael back up. Just if there are any questions about the expanded level sheets, there's a slide to help walk us through this a little bit. I know this is some elected officials' favorite part of the day because you get to put back in what I took out or override any of my signatures, but there aren't that many this year. Of course, we try to only put in the things that are absolutely necessary. There were, I think, 5, 2 of which I signed, 3 of which I did not. I think that's correct. We're talking about pages 213 through 217. Of course, we can walk through these a little bit. HR software actually, this is I don't even know what to call you. Assistant Village Manager / HR Director Crotty. If you want to just say a couple things about the applicant tracking software, and then Chief Dunn, if you want to say a little bit about the police reporting. This is fairly insignificant, but they are expanded levels, so wanted to put them in here to make sure that you concurred with their expenditure.
Thank you, Manager Svendelis. The applicant tracking software really is, it's a fairly minimal cost, but it's something that really would drag us into what I would say are the early 2000s. But what we're facing right now are 2 things. Internally, we have a fairly small HR department. It's really 1.5 people. When we do recruit for positions, it's a fairly labor-intensive process, both for the applicant and for staff. Applicants right now can download the form, but they have to print it off. It's our application form. They have to then somehow send it back to us, either bring it in, mail it in, scan it, send it in. When we get it, we need to make sure that we've got all the pieces in place, which sometimes takes some follow-up from the HR coordinator who does this kind of work, putting it into the right electronic folders, sending it out to the departments, having them review these. It's a time-consuming process, and it takes time away from, frankly, more important things that the HR coordinator could be doing. So internally, this would help quite a bit, because what these systems do is you're able to apply through this software. You can't get it wrong because you can't submit it unless you've filled out all the blanks. It comes directly into this software. We can provide access to the departmental decision makers so they can review these as they come in. There's no more having to save these things into folders or make separate files and take all of that time up. So that's the operational reason for doing it. The other issue that frankly I keep hearing it at the various seminars and conferences that I've attended is that if we intend to attract the new generations of applicants, they're not going to take the time to print out a form and scan it. They want to be able to access it, fill it in, press a button, and come in. We're going to lose our ability to attract the next generation of workers if we're not at least taking some steps to try and bring ourselves to this new age. So that's really what's behind this. It's fairly minimal cost. There's an ongoing maintenance cost that would appear in future budgets, but we believe that for $5,000 we'd be able to get this up and running next year.
So the way this works, just as a reminder, the white sheets, the ones that have my signature on them, the 2 things you see on the screen, are approved at my level, which only means that they are already included in the budget numbers as presented to you. So if you say no, we get $5,000, we pull $5,000 out. If you say yes, we are not adding $5,000. The addition has already been made in the budget as presented. So I just wanted to put that out there. Are there any questions about this particular item?
Michael, how long do you have to save an application?
The applications, it depends on the state laws with respect to that. Typically, if you don't hire someone, I believe, I may be making this up here, but I believe we have to save them for 2 or 3 years after that.
So there's a storage?
Yes, there's a storage issue, but
okay.
it's not like some of these things that you have to save for forever.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Can we do a
What's the consensus of the board to keep or to drop? Trustee
Yes.
Vogel? Trustee Papantos?
Yes.
Trustee Vito?
Keep it.
Trustee Lang? Trustee Kruger?
Keep it.
Trustee Brady? I'm also in favor of keeping it.
Excellent, thank you. Sticking with the items on the screen, we will move to page 215 for online police reporting. Chief Dunn, if you would just say a few words.
Sure. This will allow individuals to make police reports via the internet to us. Once we receive the report, it'll be reviewed and either assigned to a police officer, to an investigator for follow-up, or the report stands on its own. This will assist our residents where they just want to make us aware of a situation, report maybe minor damage. Maybe it's a child visitation issue where mother or father brought the child home 10 minutes late and they just want it documented. Incidents like that. So they would just be able to fill the report instead of coming into the station to our lobby where they may have to change their schedule because they're leaving for work, or instead of calling us to their house, they can just do it from home on the internet, and we may have to follow up with them or we may not. It's a convenience to them, it's a convenience to us, and it goes back to, you know, the doing more with less.
And I think as AVM Karate appropriately pointed out, it brings us kicking and screaming into the early 2000s to be able to do this. Any questions?
Yes.
Trustee Kruger.
Thank you. Chief, does this software allow sharing of photos and media? Like you said, if they were reporting some damage, somebody spray painted their fence, could they?
That would be in the follow-up. That would not be in the initial.
Okay. So it's really truly just a reporting software, hey, this happened?
Yes. Yes. So a lot of times people just they need a police report for their insurance company. They really don't even want to see the police.
Right.
And you know, we're not doing an investigation. We're just documenting the event for them.
And who will monitor or verify, you know, the information on our end?
Well, at the end of the day, it'll be the patrol commander who will make the ultimate decision of does it go to patrol for follow-up or forward over to investigations, or does it stand alone?
Fair enough. Thank you.
Trustee Brady, did you have a question?
Yeah, that was my concern. If you were to not respond to an online complaint and it should escalate at some point, are we going to be liable for not responding? You know.
I think the understanding is when you make the report, I mean, it'd be no different than in person. We are made aware of it, and, you know, are we guilty of acts of omission all the time or commission? I mean, it's
Okay.
just part of the day.
Thank you.
Trustee Papantos?
Just real quick question. How are we going to roll this out or announce it to let people know that this is available and how to work the program?
The goal would be on our website, the board meeting, and also on social media, and through our local video channels.
And then are we going to do any type of cost-benefit analysis at the end of 6 months or a year to see how
At the
this
end of the
works?
year, we'll take a look at how many reports were made, and hopefully it will be significant, and then we can do the analysis to see the benefit of continuing and potentially expanding.
Great, thank you.
If there are no other questions, can we do a consensus?
Consensus of the board, Trustee Brady?
Yes.
Trustee Kruger?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Yes.
Trustee Vito?
Yes.
Trustee Papantos?
Yes.
Trustee
Yes.
Vogel, sorry. It went away, it just went away. I'm yes too.
Am I dismissed?
Excellent, thank you.
No, I'm still here and You're stuck with me.
Moving on now to the three items that did not receive initial approval from me. I guess out of fairness, we have to ask everyone to at least say a few words about them, so you have the opportunity to ask questions should you want to consider them. So, Michael, you want to say just a few words about the pension liability software?
Yes, this was presented to us earlier this year. What this would allow us to do is to do a deeper dive analysis into our actuarial reports, our police and fire pension fund actuarial reports, to determine what, to do an analysis of what would be the value of, for instance, making an additional contribution like we have done. What does that do long-term in terms of the savings to the village? It also allows us to change our assumptions in terms of some of our demographic assumptions for the pension funds, our investment return assumption, which we talked a lot about earlier, and so forth, to see what that does to our liabilities. And right now, we basically get a paper report from our actuaries once a year telling us what the status of the fund is, but there's not much we can do with that in terms of analyzing the information. This would allow us to go a lot further and present more detailed information to the board or the public. It's not something, it's a nice to have, it's not a have to have.
And that was my reason for not signing it. Certainly there is value to this, but again, considering the climate that we're in, it was a nice to have, not a have to have. That was simply my opinion. Of course, it's up to you if you'd like to add that in. I think I saw Trustee Lang first.
Michael, do we have a chance to have this program sort of pay for itself in a year, 2 years? Would it?
I don't think it would really necessarily pay for itself, but it would provide us with better information in terms of decision-making going forward. So I guess from the perspective, if we made better decisions, it might pay for itself. Yeah, I suppose that's true.
But it has a potential of saving us money. Would it save $17,500 worth in X amount of years?
I can't say that for sure. I can say that it would allow us to do a better analysis of our pension funding.
You're just talking yourself out of it.
I know. Well, I'm trying to be honest. I don't want to sell you on something and then come back later and say it didn't save us $17,000.
You make an excellent point, Trustee Lang, that this is, just to point out for those that don't have it in front of them, this is a cost spread over 4 years. So it is $17,500 all in, but we would only be talking about $5,500, I assume, for the first year, the implementation fee, and then the first of the $4,000 annual fees.
Is there anyone else using this that you might be able to get some analysis on, and find out if it's working for them and saving them money?
Yes.
And then perhaps next year?
Absolutely.
Good. Done.
Trustee Vogel.
That question was answered. 4 years.
Excellent. Trustee Papantos, did you have a question?
Right, I guess my only comment is if we were in better shape with the state, knowing what was coming in, I would say, at $5,500 and then $4,000 a year, this is a no-brainer, but, maybe next year we'll be a little more sure of what's happening with the state.
Mm-hmm. Agree. Trustee Kruger.
Just a quick question. In the memo portion, it showed that this only includes for police and fire. There was other post-employment benefit and IMRF. Do you know how much it is to add those? I mean, maybe if you come back with this again, I'd almost think it would be more robust to include all pension.
We could definitely include the other post-employment benefits and IMRF, and I think it would just be nominal additional charge.
Okay, thanks.
Consensus?
Is anyone interested in adding this? That was quick. Next.
All right, so I think we have a no for the record.
Sorry,
Page 216. The irony of this, Mark, if you don't mind, I'll talk about it. The irony of this is that it's one that I asked Mark to put together. You saw it last year. Quite simply, it is just trying to make the landscaping outside this building look as presentable as the building does. We've had a number of trees and bushes and shrubs not survive the last few seasons. Public Works does an excellent job of trying to maintain and doing their best to maintain the appearance of our landscaping at Village Hall. But I did want to see what it would cost to actually fill those gardens with something green and sustainable. And that is what you see before you, which is $50,000. You saw this again last year. I would love to have said this is something we should move forward with. However, even though I asked for the number, I couldn't sign it. But that was the reason behind it. It was just to try and spruce up Village Hall. And now you heard my reason why I don't think right now we can call this a priority.
Anyone interested? No.
Trustee Brady.
Thank you. You know, at the expense of our looking good, do we want to just keep, well, where does this end? When all the trees are gone, we're going to say maybe we should start planting some new trees. If this is deteriorated to this point, where it's going to cost $50,000 today to fix this, what's it going to be a year from now, 2 years from now? You know, maintaining landscaping is part of any cost. It should be included all the time. The longer we let this go, the worse it's going to get. I'm not so sure this isn't a good idea to put this in.
You mean to keep it out?
Keep it.
Gotcha. Trustee Lang, did you want to?
Yes. So would it, I read in here poor soil conditions. So do we have to, like that center median, I know there's some issues with plants staying alive in there. Do you have to kind of dig out the soil in some cases? And
We would, yes. Many of these plants that have been lost, they're not, you know, like the major grass areas, but they are along the edges where salt and salt dust does affect the plants. And you might have noticed that we had really hundreds of rose plants in our parking lot. Those were affected greatly by salt. There's no question about it. That's where a lot of the plants have an issue. And yes, if we did redo the plants in a lot of these areas, like in the median there, we would have to change the soil. But I couldn't guarantee that they would continue to survive. It's just a function of plants in a hardscape landscape. It's not easy to keep them alive for long periods of time.
well, here's one of the few times I'd agree with Trustee Brady. No, just kidding. But seriously, we require all of our businesses to maintain landscaping. And we should just be able to do the same and meet that same criteria. And we should maintain our landscaping as well. I know there's a cost to it, but there's a cost to our local businesses. And so I believe we should absorb that cost as well. So I'm in for it.
Trustee Papantos?
I think what we have to realize is that we are still going to be maintaining landscaping. There are budget lines for regular maintenance, and this is an extra and a replacement and kind of a total redo, which, you know, in light of our current budget, I think $50,000 is a big spend for something, especially if we're going to lose the plants again due to salt and, you know, in 2 years or 3 years on down the road. I think we have to relook at it. I don't think this is the year for this. I agree with Manager Svandelis. Thank you.
Trustee Vogel?
Is there such a thing as a salt-proof plant?
Not that I'm aware of, except there's some grass possibly that,
Weeds?
yeah, some weeds. But I can't have any
There's
noxious
nothing that,
weeds. I can't plant any noxious weeds, so those are the ones that probably survive the best.
Okay, I thought maybe there'd be something out there that would be. What does the state do along the highway?
Weeds.
Not much.
Weeds.
You will notice that a lot of times when you see medians being planted, they are relatively wide medians where the plants are put in. We have a wide median at the Milwaukee Avenue. When they get narrow, It's very tough not to put snow on
be
top of
done.
there. We are, as I said, we have reduced some of our, our salt application. It might be a little bit better now than it was. Maybe we could, try some and see how it works, but it's up to you guys.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions?
Question. Is this strictly for Village Hall campus, or is it Village Hall, Police, Station 24, 23, you know what I mean?
Yes, it's
All village-owned properties for
no.
50,000?
No. This
Just
is
right
for
here.
let's call it mostly Village Hall. There are some plantings near and around the police station, but that was a separate project. This is really, when Village Hall was put in, there was an expansive planting plan, a lot of different roses, a lot of different perennials that have gone by the wayside.
Okay, and Town Center is being built and constructed, and lots of construction traffic, and, we don't think that that would have any impact on us changing some of our landscaping and then having it get driven over or ruined by a truck or something?
I think that if we did this landscaping, we decide to do some more plantings, we would not put back every plant, for instance, in every location. We'd be a little bit more conservative of where we put the plants, the new plants, for instance, maybe not so many in the parking lot.
Right, because of what's happening next door, and
Next door
maybe-
as well is just, they just didn't survive very well there. But I'm not too concerned about traffic from Town Center running over our curbs, so, man, that typically is not the reason why these plants didn't
Yeah,
survive.
soil and everything else, but maybe we wait and see what they're gonna put in there, and then there's some blend in the landscaping that, we hold off and wait until Town Center gets their landscaping in, and then somehow they are our next door neighbor, so, I don't know, I'm still thinking about it, go move on to everybody else.
Any other questions, or?
Yeah. This is just a planting replacement, right? It's not any structural replacement like retaining walls or anything like that?
No, strictly
It
plants.
costs 50 grand for plants and dirt?
It's actually a really good price. This is from our
Sounds
landscaper. We have to go out for bid for this, of course. This is from our existing landscaper, the guy does the Milliloo, that does all the work around here. $50,000 for 1,200 plants. That's actually a really good price. And that's not,
25
there's no
grand.
design.
25 grand, I'll go to Home Depot with Vogel and a truck, and we'll take care of it.
You're not going to get 1,200 plants.
All right.
You gotta plant them?
Yeah, but they'll be guaranteed for a year.
Excuse me.
That's right.
Yes, that is a good point. There is no opportunity to go after, after the landscape architect or anything like that. They are all out of warranty.
I don't hear that enough, but go ahead.
By years. So they did survive for their first season and then met their fate. Consensus, President Horker?
Trustee Vogel,
No.
Trustee Papantos,
No for the expense.
Trustee Vito,
No.
Trustee Lang,
Yes.
Trustee Kruger,
Not this year.
Trustee Brady.
Yes.
So that's 4-2, and I'm still a no anyway.
Excellent, thank you. And I will bring it back then next year and take into consideration what everyone said about making sure that this campus remains presentable. And again, no reflection on Public Works or Building Services. I think they've done an excellent job. This is all out of their control. Last but not least, the expanded levels, page 217 is the hook lift wood chip box body. We tried to make that more difficult, maybe come up with an acronym, but nope. Director Janik, if you would, please.
Thank you. In 2015, the board approved a type of a vehicle. It's a hook lift vehicle. That vehicle is you're allowed to put different bodies on that truck. So far, the idea at the time philosophy was there's 4 different types of bodies you can put on that truck: a dump body, salt spreader body, a tank body. Those 3 that we have, and this would be the 4th item. This is a wood chip body. This would be intended to be used when there's like say a bad storm and there's a lot of trees down. We do have 2 chipper trucks with bodies on them to accept wood chips. This would allow a truck, that we would have a truck, that, being able to use for other items, but also have a chip box on it that could go to the site, receive the chips, and then drive and dump them. Instead of, right now, we have two trucks with set boxes on the back. If they get full, then they have to drive away, dump those bodies, and we're losing a crew to do the chipping at the same time. This allows us to have a separate truck that doesn't have the chipper hooked up to it, that can go back and forth from a site and receive the chips and then keep coming back and forth, dumping it and coming back. So it's not just a one truck with the box on it. It will be in addition to the hook truck that we have right now that has 3 different items that we use. This will be the 4th one.
I certainly saw the value in this. Credit to Director Janik and Superintendent Spratt for the idea. Credit to the board for allowing the purchase of the truck in the past. As Mark said, this is the 4th body type that would be used on that one piece of equipment. It is an excellent idea. The only reason that it didn't receive my signature is in looking at personnel and staffing, weighing that against a piece of equipment. Obviously, there are efficiencies that need to be considered, but I put this in the nice to have as opposed to have to have. Certainly, there is benefit to this piece of equipment. It is not completely a extravagance. There absolutely is use for it, but again, just in the priority, I put people over equipment. In this case, we can answer any questions that you have. Trustee Papantos.
Just real quickly, where do you dump the chips once you?
We actually dump it at our facility, Public Works facility, and then they get picked up. Typically, they get picked up and we dump them with Waste Management.
So it really isn't like you have to drive an hour away to do this, when you stop at this point. And how often does it occur that you have to stop what you're doing, go dump the chipper truck, and then come back and start again?
It's hard for me to tell you how often that might happen. I mean, the backs of those trucks, they get full relatively quickly, but of course it just means how many trees and how much chipping you're doing. If it was a bad windstorm and there was a lot of trees down, we'd be filling those trucks up relatively quickly. But I can't tell you how many trees it takes to fill up the back of one of those trucks.
And we only do the parkway trees, right? If the branch is down in the parkway, it's not like you're going to come
We
to
do,
somebody's
except
backyard.
when there's a very strong windstorm and it's like a village-wide event, and we will chip other trees as well that get brought to the curb. We will do that.
But they have to be
Not
brought to the
always,
curb.
but only if there's a very strong windstorm that is an obvious effect on the entire community.
Thank you.
Trustee Lang.
How can this not be SURF eligible?
Well, it's a brand-new piece of equipment. It meets the threshold for replacement, but it's a new piece of equipment.
Gotcha.
So should you say yes, it will become part of SURF.
That doesn't come out of SURF?
Not until...
Replacement.
Not until it's a
replaced.
replacement. This is a new piece of equipment. Any other questions? President Horker?
Consensus, Trustee Brady?
No.
Trustee Kruger?
No.
Trustee Lang?
Nope.
Trustee Vito?
No.
Trustee Papantos?
No.
Trustee Vogel?
Yes.
I am a no. That would be no.
Thank you. So we have added, so the budget remains the same. The 2 that were approved remain in. The 3 pinks that were not currently included stay that way. In a second, we'll ask for a motion for executive session to staff. To the public, the meeting is not over. It should be a quick executive session, so please stay in the room. And President Horker?
I would look for motion to recess to executive session.
So moved.
For the, if we could.
I'm sorry. For the purposes of the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of a specific employee or employees of the village. Now, Trustee Kruger?
So moved.
Motion, second.
Second.
Trustee Vogel? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Everyone?
We need a roll call on that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Please, thank you.
It says all in favor.
Trustee Brady?
But
In favor?
Need a roll call?
I need a roll call on the
For
adjournment.
executive session.
Yes.
Trustee Kruger?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Yes.
Trustee Vito?
Yes.
Trustee Papantos?
Yes.
Trustee Vogel?
Yes.
I am also yes. Back shortly.
The temporary clerk is upset.
What's the next step?
You're in San
No, he said, is there a spider in there? I'm like, we're gonna leave it, right?
I don't say spiders.
There's a reason for that.
Yes, agree.
Frame in there.
Agree.
Praying mantises.
Well, yeah, those are cool.
All right, I would like to call us back into regular session. I need a motion to reconvene from
Executive session.
executive session at 12:36.
So moved.
Motion, trustee Papantos, second. Anybody?
Second.
Trustee Lang. Roll call. Trustee Vogel.
Here.
Yes.
Yes.
Trustee Papantos.
Yes.
Trustee Vito.
Yes.
Trustee Lang.
Yes.
Trustee Kruger.
Yes.
Trustee Brady.
Yes.
I am in favor as well.
Thank you. One more thing before we are done for the day. Director Monchain, do you want to, we have a slide for the bottom line, yes? Okay, this is what I meant at the very beginning about making decisions. This is where we are at. We've made no changes to the budget from what was presented to you. So here is how we get to a balanced budget. As you saw earlier, we begin with a deficit. One of the things that we are recommending, and then again asking for your concurrence, TIF surplus. We recognize the benefit of declaring a surplus within the TIF districts that can afford them based on the projects that have been identified and upcoming. Director Monchain has done the math and realized, should we declare a surplus in 2018, the village's share of that declaration would be $170,000. This is sensitive, again, to the projects that we know of within the TIF districts. And of course, this means that we will be sending money back to the other taxing bodies, of which our portion is $170,000. The Convention Visitors Bureau, I passed out earlier today a memo that was provided to us by the CVB. It is a follow-up to the presentation they made a couple of weeks ago in an attempt to identify more specifically some of the benefits of the CVB, and I'll ask Director Malanaphy to say a few words on that in just a moment. The staffing changes, you see a number here estimated and prorated for 10 months. That number is a general number based on the positions that we've identified, and then an additional property tax revenue of $367,000. That number is incorporated to equal the number that Director Monchain showed in his slide earlier. That gives us an ending budget of a positive $45,000. Any changes that you make to this slide then would change that number accordingly. Before we go down the list and ask yes or no, Director Malanaphy, if you could just speak a bit on the CVB and anything else you'd like to bring up directly related to the CVB and economic development, and then that will, I think, give the board some foundation to ask questions and then take a consensus on that item.
Thank you, Manager Svandelis. Well, first of all, I'd just like to thank the board for all their leadership and support for the Department of Economic Development. You know, it's all about cooperation and coordination with all the other departments. We have about $220 million in development underway in Wheeling. We've used more efficient use of our finite resources. We've had a lot of success lately with the town center, with Northgate Crossings, the Whitley, Uptown 500, Wolf Crossings. We attracted Richlow Foods, Hamilton Partners, 181,000 square foot spec building, Cytex Group in Misner, 84,000 square feet. And we've done, we've got a couple new hangars going in at Hawthorne Aviation. We've reduced vacancy, and we've backfilled over 1 million square feet of vacant industrial buildings with the Class 6B. We couldn't have done all this without the board, without Village Manager Svandelis. I'd also like to acknowledge in a big way Village Attorney Jim Ferrolo on all his work with our redevelopment agreements, our term sheets. We couldn't do it without our village attorney. And we've really worked to enhance our marketing and our website, our print advertising, radio, more electronic marketing and content marketing. But and really being efficient at our trade shows, attending ICSC and having meetings scheduled in advance with retailers that we know, developers that we know. We were able to attract Binny's and Salada and Starbucks and Cafe Zupas. Many of the trustees have helped me with ideas and suggestions on types of retailers and restaurants to go after. I mean, Boston Fish Market, Trustee Lang was instrumental in pointing out that restaurant to me, and we went and talked to them right away when Pete Miller's became available, and we were able to attract Boston Fish Market to the village. We're really focusing on sales tax producing uses and businesses that can enhance our sales tax revenue stream, as Director Monshane mentioned. You know, the Convention Bureau is another organization that we're involved with. They certainly market Wheeling, our hotels, our restaurants. They're involved with Taste of the Town. You received the memo. They talked about many of the economic benefits that they do provide, many of which are difficult to quantify. If someone goes on their website and reads about Restaurant Row or the Westin Hotel, and they subsequently patronize that restaurant or book a room, we can't necessarily measure that. But I'm on the board of the Convention Bureau. I think that by becoming members, we have marketed Wheeling along with the other North Shore attractions and hospitality venues, and I think that you know, we're going to have to think long and hard about whether those resources are providing a good return on our investment. And again, I'm on the board, so I have a fiduciary responsibility to the board. I think they do a tremendous job for the Village of Wheeling. Be happy to answer any questions. And just lastly, I'd like to thank my liaison, Village President Horker, for working really closely with the Department of Economic Development. And I'll answer any questions you may have.
Questions from the board?
Well, then if we could, I don't know if we need to do a consensus for each of these things. Does anyone have any questions on the rest of the four items? Anything they want to say? Any questions? Any comments?
Specifically, you want to know our opinion on each of these if we have questions about letting the budget stand as it's presented here?
Yeah, I think if there's no questions or comments, then maybe Trustee Papantos?
Just one quick question on the TIF surplus. How many of the TIF districts and which ones would be affected by declaring a surplus?
So as you know, we have 5 TIF districts. We would be looking at 2 of them, the Lake Cook, Milwaukee TIF, which has been very successful and therefore has a lot of money coming into it every year. And then the South Milwaukee TIF, which also has a lot of increment that's coming in that's not necessarily obligated to anything at this point.
Thank you.
So if there's no other comments, I think we could take these as a whole and just ask if you concur with what is presented, leaving the village with a surplus.
I would like to actually specifically ask, is everyone all right with still, the Convention Bureau is still a forward, Trustee Brady? Still, we're good with the membership for the Convention Bureau.
And that's eliminated or included?
I was curious your opinion.
My opinion?
Yes, sir.
I can see a value to it, but, you know, when we're trying to balance budgets and everything else, I probably can also see a lot more better use to that $81,000 than the Convention Bureau right now. So I'd say no.
Trustee Kruger, do you have an opinion about the Convention Center?
I think Trustee Brady said it beautifully. I too would rather have people than things.
Trustee Lang?
Completely see the value of having it, and I think we should continue.
Thank you. Trustee Vito?
Yeah, it's a business generator for the town, especially at our northeast corner. I'd see the value in it.
Keep it.
Keep it.
Thank you. Trustee Papantos?
Without having firm numbers of its success, whether or not people are going on their own, and in light of the rest of the budget, I say not this year, no.
Trustee Vogel?
Based on the number that was floated, $10 million worth of business, I believe you mentioned there was $10 million worth of referrals or per se at one point in time. John?
Yes, Trustee Vogel. And the memo, I believe, really articulates all the benefits that they could quantify.
I mean, even if we only realized 1% of that, that's $100,000. It pays for itself. I think we need to leave it in there.
Oh, that means me. Yay, me. It's difficult for me because a $45,000 surplus is a hiccup. It's, I don't see that as a strong surplus on an $80 million budget. But I do understand the value of membership like this, so I will go along with staying a member this year. But I would like to see some sort of, you know, some stronger acknowledgement of the convention center brought these guys, and they occupy a factory now. They occupy a resident. That would be really nice next year. So then the consensus on the convention center is to maintain the membership. Are there any other questions about any of the other items on this list in front of us? Otherwise, we will approve it as it's presented.
Yes, and Michael is feverishly calculating.
It ends up being about 37,000 roughly.
Okay.
Deficit of 37,000 with the membership of the convention center.
And like you said, it's an $80 million budget that is certainly not
it's fluid.
A negative thing. It is fluid, absolutely.
Any other questions on the items on the list in front of us?
1%.
If there are no other questions, then we need a motion to approve the budget as
Consensus, I think, because you're not, this is just a workshop.
This is tentative.
Oh, okay,
Right,
sorry.
right. We just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page, so if you would, that would
So
be
the
great.
consensus of the board then relative to the budget presented to us today, trustee Vogel?
Yes.
Keep it. Trustee Papantos?
Yes.
Trustee Vito?
Yes.
Trustee Brady?
Run that by me again.
Consensus on whether or not everything that we've been presented to and all the changes that we've recommended are approved?
Including this last one?
Yes.
So we're approving all these changes?
This is a tentative budget. This is not an official approval.
Okay.
The budget ordinance will come to you in December.
Where is the convention bureau in or out?
Is in.
That's it. All right, it's temporary, yes.
Overall, yes.
Overall, yes.
Trustee Kruger?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Thank you, everyone, for spending your Saturday morning with us. In the spirit of our fiscal situation, there is a box lunch out there.
Very true.
Are there any other questions or presentations?
There are none.
Thank you, sir. I'd be looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
That was a motion, trustee Vogel, second from trustee Kruger. Is that an all in favor?
All in favor, yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all for sharing your Saturday.
Great job acting, clerk.